Chapter 415. Heaven's Pride level experts were exceptionally rare for any force. They were considered as treasures. These forces wouldn't let them die under any circumstances. Yi Shiwen could certainly enjoy such treatment as well. Sister, I have snatched the inner core from that young master foam. We can easily make a breakthrough into the next realm if we absorb it. Yi Shiwen spoke up. They immediately left for the inn where Hua Minghan had been staying all this while. They were far more secure inside the city than outside. They didn't waste any time and immediately began to absorb the white dwarf's inner core. Time began to pass second by second while they absorbed the inner core. Time passed day by day, and an astonishing rumor began to spread in the Wind Dragon City. It was a well-known legend that the Wind Dragon City was established on the corpse of a giant wind dragon. However, this was only a rumor, nothing more. Nobody was sure about it. Everyone had slowly become used to it since it had been around for countless years. However, this legend and the rumor were closely related. An astonishing rumor had spread around this time. It said that the Wind Dragon City was genuinely built on the corpse of a wind dragon. It was obviously just a rumor, nothing else. After all, couldn't one confirm it by merely digging a 3 feet deep hole in the ground? However, the genuinely amazing thing was that it was said that there was a lair of a wind dragon not very far from the Wind Dragon City. However, this lair would shift to different spaces with time. So, it was very difficult to find it. But some great calculations had been made, and it was anticipated that this lair would soon be born in this space. This rumor had excited countless people in the Wind Dragon City. There were many rumors about the dragon race. In fact, nobody could tell the exact number of these rumors. However, this one couldn't be ignored. The dragon race was fond of collecting all kinds of treasures. And this wind dragon was already dead. But it must have left behind its treasures. How could this not have made everyone excited? People would advance by leaps and bounds if they could obtain some of these treasures. This rumor was getting more and more intense with each passing day. In fact, accurate coordinates had begun to come out as well. This had increased everyone's excitement about the matter. All kinds of large and small forces from various regions had hurried into the Wind Dragon City in order to get their slice of the profit. Moreover, human beings weren't the only ones. Even the star beasts that lived in the space and other regions' demon beasts had also rushed over. Many sage-level star beasts and demon beasts had attacked the Wind Dragon City in the last 6 months. The human experts were certainly interested in these treasures. However, those sage-level star beasts and demon beasts had also shown keen interest in the treasures of the Wind Dragon. The appearances of these star beasts and demon beasts wouldn't change much after they entered the sage realm. However, their wisdom was no longer inferior to that of humans. Moreover, many of these star beasts and demon beasts had lived for thousands of years. So, they were old and wise. An average person didn't stand a chance against them when it came to schemes and tricks. Human experts could advance by leaps and bounds after they had obtained this treasure. Similarly, these star beasts and demon beasts would benefit a lot if they could obtain this treasure. People would always go after the treasure trove of dragons. This was a historically proven fact. This dragon had surpassed the great sage realm during the course of its life. Therefore, the items it had left behind would be extremely precious. The city lord had dispatched troops to repel the invasion of these star beasts and demon beasts. Soon, half a year had already passed amidst these circumstances. Yi Shiwen was sitting cross-legged on a bed. He hadn't moved in these last 6 months. The energy within that inner core had continued to flow into Yi Shiwen's and Hua Minghan's body at a steady pace. Yi Shiwen had steadily absorbed the star power present inside the core. He had absorbed it continuously for half a year. So, the size of his universe had also increased significantly. It had almost expanded to become twice as large. The sun inside his universe glittered even more brightly. It was illuminating the entire universe. It seemed as if it was the only star present in his universe. Neptune was also gradually forming inside Yi Shiwen's universe. His martial power had seen an unceasing promotion. But the formation of Neptune had also neared its completion. In fact, it was only one step away from taking complete shape. The scorching energy was unceasingly entering Yi Shiwen's body. This energy wasn't a problem for Hua Menghan. Her heavenly phoenix body possessed exceptional acceptance ability towards this energy. It wasn't a big problem for Yi Shiwen either. His gilded tyrant form and his meridians had been exercised to a very high extent. An average person would have burnt down and turned to ashes if he were in Yi Shiwen's place. The unceasing absorption of this energy for half a year had resulted in the formation of its own principles. Yi Shiwen's Tao principles had reached 499. It could reach up to 500 Tao principles in just one step. This was a huge watershed. He would become comparable with the experts of the late stage of the semi-sage realm after he had crossed this step. A look into the situation inside Yi Shiwen's body could terrify anyone since the principles within his body had become exceptionally thick. They were nearly 20 or more times thicker than those found in the body of an ordinary semi-sage expert. An average person's body would have exploded by now. Only Yi Shiwen could hold it. This was the advantage of having a tyrannical body. Yi Shiwen's accumulation had already reached a terrifying level. It had become even more profound than those old experts of the Legendary's great complete realm who had accumulated energy for hundreds of years. He had already reached a big crucial point. He could enter the semi-sage realm after he'd crossed this point. He would truly transcend from the legendary realm after he had stepped into the semi-sage realm. He could then begin to stride towards the sage realm. He would only surmount the half-step legendary realm in this process. However, he would no longer be comparable with his old self after that. Moreover, he would completely detach himself from the binds and limitation of half-step legendary realm after he had stepped into the semi-sage realm. His lifespan would increase to 1,000 years in one fell swoop. And it would increase even further after he had stepped into the sage realm. This was the advantage of being well-prepared. Yi Shiwen felt as if his lifespan might increase endlessly to an unspecified period. The first step of becoming a sage would be completed after he had crossed this step. However, he would be stuck here for a lifetime if he couldn't complete this step. This wasn't a rare thing. Several experts of Legendary's great complete realm had remained stuck at this step, and they had never made it through in their lifetime. Of course, nobody had heard that any experts of the half-step Legendary's great complete realm had gotten stuck at this barrier. However, Yi Shiwen still didn't wish to take any chance. He had absorbed the required amount of energy from the inner core in this half a year's time. So, it was the time to cross this threshold. The stars inside Yi Shiwen's body began to revolve while he operated the observing person scripture. The star power got condensed little by little and attacked the inner barrier of Yi Shiwen's realm. This barrier to the semi-sage realm had been eroded unceasingly like a dam in the last half a year's time, so it was already heavily damaged. Yi Shiwen was focused. He didn't need to worry about the sudden arrival of the heavenly tribulation this time. It would be unique this time, since the heavenly tribulation wouldn't arrive. This was because he had detached himself from the half-step legendary earlier, and had comprehended the principles of the semi-sage realm. So, the heavenly tribulation would arrive again when he'd enter the sage realm. In fact, Yi Shiwen would have chosen a desolate place to cross the heavenly tribulation if this wasn't the case. It would have been extremely conspicuous if he had chosen to cross the tribulation inside the Wind Dragon City. People have forgotten about him in the last 6 months after great difficulties. And that too because the matter of the Wind Dragon's lair had suddenly come to light. He didn't wish to attract people's attention again. The barrier had indeed been damaged rather heavily by now. However, it was still difficult for Yi Shiwen to cross this natural mode. Bang! Yi Shiwen's entire body's power condensed into one mass and began to bombard the barrier in order to cross it. A long time passed. Yi Shiwen heaved a sigh. However, his facial expressions conveyed that he hadn't relaxed yet. He had failed, but he wasn't dejected. So, he continued to attack that barrier. Once, twice, thrice. Yi Shiwen had lost count of how many times he had attacked that barrier. He himself became somewhat numb to the rebounds of the impacts, but he still continued to attack the realm's barrier. He was clinging to the idea that he might succeed if he continued to attack the barrier to no end. Bang! Yi Shiwen's real elemental energy somewhat dried up after another routine of attacks. He was thinking whether or not to replenish his energy with the primary spirit dawn. However, that majestic barrier, which had remained unbudged even after facing ceaseless attack, suddenly opened up. It seemed as if Yi Shiwen's real elemental energy had finally broken through a huge threshold and had forged ahead into a new and vast world. And then suddenly, it began to flow smoothly. Yi Shiwen's aura also rose incredibly. There was nothing around him except his new semi-sage aura, and it continued to revolve nonstop. Countless principles rushed into his body, and his body began to transform. Yi Shiwen could distinctly feel that his body was undergoing an unfathomable transformation. It seemed as if his body was transcending and approaching towards becoming an even more advanced form of life. It seemed as if an ant was transforming into a human being. It was obviously an entirely different level of feeling. However, the transformation stopped midway. Yi Shiwen frowned at this. He felt as if he had been enjoying inside the cool seawater in the summer, but someone suddenly dragged him to the shore and exposed him to the sun. He knew that the rest of the transformation would be completed when he'd enter the sage realm. Yi Shiwen frantically began to absorb the surrounding principles without any delay. They condensed in the form of magical symbols and entered his body one by one. These principles then condensed into talismans with magical symbols on them. These were far thicker than the ordinary semi-sage talismans. In fact, they were so thick that they could scare a person to death. The bottleneck of 500 Tao principles no longer existed because Yi Shiwen had now entered the semi-sage realm. Yi Shiwen continued to condense the Tao principles like a madman. 499, 500, 600, 700, 800. Yi Shiwen finally stopped after he had condensed 800 Tao principles. Then, he suddenly opened his eyes. At last, the semi-sage realm. To be continued. Chapter 416, Yi Shiwen opened his eyes and looked all around. Things looked exactly the same as they were half a year ago. The rented rooms of these martial art experts were completely different from that of an ordinary person's. They were protected by all kinds of small-sized but solid matrix formations. Even dust couldn't enter into these rooms. Otherwise, half a year's time was enough to fill the entire room with dust. Some small-sized matrix formations were laid inside the room as well. However, Yi Shiwen and Hua Menghan had jointly laid out a big matrix formation of their own inside the room before they had started the closed-door training. They had done this to isolate their auras from the outside world. Therefore, nobody on the outside could hear the sounds that came from inside their room. There was a huge explosion at the time when Yi Shiwen had made a breakthrough into the semi-sage realm. However, nobody had sensed anything outside the room. He raised his head and saw that Hua Menghan was sitting cross-legged in front of him. Her beautiful and gentle-looking face didn't have any expression on it. Her long and thin eyelashes were curved upward. She was in a deep level of closed-door training. Even Yi Shiwen's breakthrough into the semi-sage realm couldn't wake her up. This meant that she felt extremely safe in this environment. Otherwise, she wouldn't have dared to undergo such a deep-level closed-door training here. This showed that she felt very safe in Yi Shiwen's presence. This realization ignited a warm feeling inside Yi Shiwen's heart. Yi Shiwen had just stood up. However, he suddenly saw an astonishing and imposing aura shoot up from Hua Menghan's body. It almost broke through the matrix formation barrier, which these two had laid out. Yi Shiwen promptly strengthened the matrix barrier in order to suppress her imposing aura. Otherwise, the entire city would have been alarmed of their practice. Yi Shiwen could clearly see the power of countless principles as they crazily rushed towards Hua Menghan. The Tao principles quickly took shape in the form of magical talismans and entered her body. "Sister," Yi Shiwen spoke up. He was somewhat surprised. Hua Menghan's imposing aura indicated that she had already made a breakthrough into the late stage of the semi-sage realm. Yi Shiwen could presently be regarded as the peak expert among all the experts of the late stage of the semi-sage realm. Moreover, He would be much safer with Huang Menghan by his side. Two Heaven's Pride level experts of the late stage of the semi-sage realm had joined hands. So, Yi Shiwen was confident that they would be able to escape unscathed even if a sage expert were to attack them. Yi Shiwen got a firm grasp on the matter of the Wind Dragon lair. It was anticipated to be born soon. Yi Shiwen was undergoing closed-door training. However, this didn't mean that he didn't know anything about the Wind Dragon's lair. Huang Menghan was undergoing a deep-level closed-door training. Therefore, he sent out a portion of his divine sense outside the room and heard the discussions of several people. He got to know everything about all the major events that had taken place in the last half a year's time. He was very interested in the Wind Dragon's lair. Moreover, he knew far more about it than an average person. He had come to know everything from the star colossus that was present inside the heavenly source mirror. The wisp of the star colossus's soul had been unceasingly sucked for its energy, and this energy was then being used to condense and power up the blood slave. So, its memories were also gradually revealed in front of Yi Shiwen. There was no difference between that wisp of soul and the main body of that star colossus apart from certain core things such as bloodline inheritance, matrix formations, and so on. However, this wisp of soul knew everything the star colossus did. Therefore, Yi Shiwen's knowledge had gradually enriched. It had become even more extensive after the unceasing absorption of this star colossus's memories. In fact, his knowledge had seen an incredible rise in the past half a year's time. He had come to know many of the universe's secrets. One must know that each of these star colossuses could consume planets and stars as food, and they lived for several thousand years. So, they obviously knew many secrets of the universe. They possessed rare knowledge. In fact, they were aware of all kinds of rare treasures and exotic gems which had ever existed. Even Yi Mo knew many such secrets. However, he had only been an assistant to a devil king. So, most of Yi Mo's knowledge was related to the devil world, and he didn't know about many secrets of the universe. Moreover, Yi Mo was like a teacher and a friend to Yi Shiwen. So, Yi Shiwen would never treat him like the star colossus. He wouldn't devour Yi Mo's soul and memories. An average person wouldn't dare to try this. Many people could peek into others' memories. However, they wouldn't dare to swallow such a mixture of soul and memories because the absorbed memory could become a portion of their own. So, it could easily affect their memory and result in a possible identity crisis. In fact, they might even become deranged. Therefore, nobody would do it unless they were forced to do it and had no choice. However, Yi Shiwen was different. He had the mysterious space. So, he could digest these memories without letting them affect his own. And the secret of the Wind Dragon City was present in the Star Colossus's memories. Moreover, the impression of this memory was quite profound. This Wind Dragon City had genuinely been established on the corpse of a wind dragon. That was true. This wind dragon had existed, and so had its lair. In fact, that wind dragon had been killed by the Star Colossus himself. The Star Colossus had wandered here once upon a time. It had then come across the newly matured wind dragon. Both parties were rare monsters and stood on top of the food chain of the universe. So, they hardly said anything before they started their battle. The dragon race was a very intrepid one. Moreover, this wind dragon was a purebred of the dragon race. However, it had only matured recently. Therefore, it couldn't be a match for the Star Colossus. It eventually lost its life to the Star Colossus. However, the Star Colossus had also sustained severe injuries. So, it had no other choice but to escape in order to repair its wounds. Therefore, Yi Shiwen knew that Wind Dragon's lair really did exist. He just didn't know the specific time it would be born in this space. He also didn't know how this news had come to spread. Innumerable years had passed since that battle. Many things had been lost in the river of time. However, one such forgotten matter had resurfaced again. Was it possible for the people to make a calculation as to where it would appear? Yi Shiwen didn't know. However, this didn't hinder his interest in the Wind Dragon's lair. Everyone knew that the dragon race was fond of collecting treasures. One could benefit immensely if they were to obtain one or two such treasures. In fact, it would be like a dream come true. Yi Shiwen saw that Hua Minghan hadn't awakened yet. She was still undergoing the deep-level closed-door training. He became somewhat anxious as to why she hadn't come out of the closed-door training already. Gee, this girl is extraordinary. She wants to cross 2 hurdles in one go. She wants to make a breakthrough into the sage realm in one fell swoop. Yimo spoke in astonishment. I must say she is bold and ambitious. But she possesses the heavenly phoenix body, as well as the bloodline of the heavenly phoenix. She may even succeed if she gave it a try. Yi Shiwen calmed down after he heard Yimo's words. She wasn't continuing with her closed-door training because she had run into any problem or anything. Rather, she wanted to make successive breakthroughs. The inner core of that white dwarf had decreased in volume. Only 1/3 of it was left. However, it was still a lot. In fact, it was enough for both of these individuals to continue the closed-door training and make another breakthrough. Yi Shiwen would have accompanied Hua Minghan in the closed-door training if this matter of the Wind Dragon's lair hadn't come to light. His realization was already enough. His understanding regarding the principles and main Tao was extremely rare among the younger generation. In fact, his overall understanding was enough to enable him to level up without any difficulty. However, he had been presented with an excellent opportunity. There could be rare treasures inside the lair of the Wind Dragon. He naturally didn't wish to miss out on this opportunity. He could come back and proceed with the closed-door training after he had dealt with this matter. A martial arts competition would take place between the 4 forces after 2 years' time. This would be a big and brutal gathering of experts. And not every Heaven's Pride level experts would get to participate in the fights. However, Yi Shiwen was sure about himself. He was certain that he would get to take part in the competition. After all, only he had the outstanding accomplishments among all Heaven's Pride level experts. The Titan Body and Fan Ming were considered as top Heaven's Pride level experts. Yet he had managed to kill these 2. Now, he needed to hold the line and push forward. He had killed 2 Heaven's Pride level experts. However, he hadn't taken them lightly. They used to be regarded as Heaven's Pride level experts. How could they possibly not be skilled and powerful? Yi Shiwen could have easily fallen into the gutter if he had been caught off guard. Moreover, the peak Heaven's Pride level experts of the 4 major forces would gather in such a big competition. He might be killed on the spot if he were to see the face of defeat. After all, there's no need to reiterate the main purpose why these forces would gather for a competition. As far as Yi Shiwen was concerned, he wouldn't show any mercy if need be. Yi Shiwen didn't wake Hua Minghan up and went out the room. He hadn't gone out since half a year. However, the waiters weren't a bit baffled to see him. This entire place was full of experts. So, this kind of thing was fairly normal. These experts used to undergo closed-door training for several years, even for decades. So, this wasn't something strange. Everything was fine as long as one had enough money to pay the rent for the room. Yi Shiwen looked for a spot to sit down inside the tavern. A bunch of news fell into his ears from the surroundings. Everyone is saying that the Wind Dragon's lair is about to be born. But why has there been no concrete information about it in the last 6 months? It's probably a lie. Maybe, but I think that it's true. Even the respectable city lord has dispatched experts. In fact, he himself has gone out thrice to look for the entrance to this Wind Dragon's lair in this last half a year. He didn't find it, though. However, I think this must be true for someone of his status to try to so hard to find it. I don't know where this news has come out from, but many powerful experts have gone out to look for the whereabouts of the Wind Dragon's lair in the last half a year. In fact, many sage experts were also present among them. They couldn't find the lair, but they have found some traces of it. This shows that Wind Dragon's lair genuinely exists. Yes, it is also said that the Wind Dragon's lair isn't in this subspace, right? So, ordinary people certainly can't see it. It has also been said that the major forces have reached out to some knowledgeable experts and have requested them to find out the time and place that Wind Dragon's lair will appear. Yi Shiwen pondered that no one had been able to find the whereabouts of the Wind Dragon's lair in the past half a year's time. However, he wasn't in a hurry, nor was he anxious. That was because others didn't know the whereabouts of the lair of the wind dragon. But he did, since the star Colossus had already passed through this region of space in the past and had a battle with the wind dragon. The wind dragon's lair is born. A loud roar came from outside the tavern, right when Yi Shiwen was pondering. To be continued. Chapter 417. The wind dragon's lair has appeared. Suddenly, the entire wind dragon city began to seethe with excitement. Everyone had been looking for the whereabouts of this wind dragon's lair for the last half a year's time. It could be said that it had attracted the attention of every person present in the wind dragon city. However, they hadn't been able to find any whereabouts of the wind dragon's lair in this half a year's time. However, it had finally appeared. Soon, the accurate news spread. It was reported that a semi-sage expert had gone out to wipe out the lair of star beasts. However, he found an abnormality in the space inside this lair. He might not have paid attention to it on ordinary days. After all, there were many such strange places in the universe. In fact, distorted and broken spaces could be found everywhere, let alone an abnormality. These places were obviously classified as forbidden and exceptionally inauspicious areas. An average person wouldn't dare to go near such places. However, the matter of the wind dragon's lair had become widely famous in this last half a year. Therefore, this expert had been keen on finding it, like every other person. As a result, he ended up finding a planet, and this planet had life on it. It was reported that many sage experts inspected and verified that this planet was indeed the lair of the wind dragon. It was brimming with thick dragon power, even after countless years. In addition, a large number of demon beasts were living on this planet. Moreover, they all possessed the blood of the dragon race. Yi Shiwen was surprised to hear this. He hadn't anticipated that the wind dragon's lair would have turned into a planet and would have been able to support life after so many years. He had searched through the memory of the star Colossus and had come to know that this wind dragon's lair used to be a desolate planet. Many planets in this vast universe supported life. However, only a few planets could transform into a living world. Indeed, this planet now supported life, but the world it hosted was far more advanced than the planet itself. Only one or two planets among countless ones could get the opportunity to transform into a world. This was extremely rare. The experts couldn't help but proceed towards the wind dragon's lair after they obtained this news. These experts weren't ordinary people. In fact, many of these experts had survived in the universe for years, and this was nothing short of incredible. And now, they had simultaneously rushed towards the wind dragon's lair. These advancing experts seemed like a grandiose army going on an expedition. They even possessed various kinds of beasts as their mounts. In fact, it almost appeared as if cavalry troops were going on a punitive conquest. However, Yi Shiwen was in no hurry. So, he first went back to the inn in order to safeguard Hua Menghan. He laid out a huge matrix so that nobody could disturb her during the closed-door training. Moreover, many experts of the true martial university were present in the city, and they could look after her if something were to happen. Therefore, it would be safer for her to stay here. Yi Shiwen left for the wind dragon's lair after he had safeguarded Hua Menghan. He finally arrived over a planet after he had passed through several ruptured spaces on the way. It appeared endless and stretched as far as one could see. It was an enormous planet. It was different from other planets. It was clearly visible that this planet was brimming with life, even if one looked from space. Yi Shiwen had excellent eyesight. He could clearly see the mountains, forests, rivers, and seas from the space. Yi Shiwen somewhat sighed with emotion. He knew this planet from the memory of the star Colossus. However, he hadn't anticipated that it would transform so much and become like this. Yi Shiwen opened his devil wings. He transformed into a golden streamer of light and burst into the atmosphere of this planet. The endless mountain ranges stretched for countless kilometers. They appeared like a giant dragon to Yi Shiwen. The ancient sky-touching trees rose straight from the ground. These trees had blotted out the sky and covered the earth as they formed a huge forest. The demon beasts' terrifying roars reverberated on the surface. The sonic booms dissipated in all directions. This place didn't look like a normal place. The demon beasts, which possessed the bloodline of the dragon race, were lurking everywhere. So, how could this place still be normal? The dragon race was considered a supreme race in the universe, and these demon beasts had some connection with the dragon's characteristics. Hence, they were extremely dreadful as well. Yi Shiwen saw a seriously damaged forest as soon as he landed on the planet. It seemed as if this forest had hosted a fierce battle. An expert must have visited this place. This planet was extremely huge. One couldn't see its edge. So, it wasn't easy to find the treasures the wind dragon had left behind. However, that didn't affect the spirits of the experts. Nothing as easy as the beginning. So, how would they obtain enormous benefits if they didn't pay the price? Yi Shiwen flew for hundreds of miles. He could see all kinds of rare herbs almost everywhere. It was extremely hard to find these herbs elsewhere since the dragon race had vanished long ago. More so because these herbs were related to the dragon race. However, these herbs could be seen everywhere on this planet. Yi Shiwen had once visited the flood dragon's tomb. But even though it was nothing in comparison to this planet, this wind dragon was a pure blood of the dragon race. So, he was far superior to that flood dragon since it was a mixed blood. That flood dragon's tomb was indeed very big. However, a big faction had been stationed there for a long time. Therefore, the herbs must have already been plundered by the faction. However, precious drug ingredients were present here in abundance, and these herbs could increase a person's lifespan by 5 to 10 years. Yi Shiwen stretched out his big hand and grasped several of these herbs. Then, he put them inside the heavenly source mirror. These drug ingredients were top-notch and could help him in concocting high-level immortality pills with the help of his alchemy furnace. This planet was occupied by the wind dragon once upon a time. The dragon is now dead, but this place is still as contaminated with his blood, essence, and dragon energy. And the dragon energy has managed to evolve this planet into such a treasure trove after countless years of development. Yemo spoke up in astonishment. This planet would have stayed barren if that wind dragon hadn't occupied it. Yi Shiwen continued to walk and continued to collect these drug ingredients. The harvest was plentiful this time. Roar! Yi Shiwen wanted to penetrate even further. However, a terrifying dragon roar suddenly reverberated in the surroundings. Hundreds of pointed-beaked dragons appeared in front of Yi Shiwen. This territory belonged to a group of pointed-beaked dragons. These dragons possessed long and pointed beaks. Their mouths were adorned with sharp teeth. They weren't extremely tall and appeared equal to the combined height of 2 men. They had 2 strong legs and possessed 2 small claws that protruded from their chest. They looked exceptionally frightening. Roar! 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 These hundreds of pointed-beaked dragons roared in unison. The monstrous demon energy began to boil over their bodies. These dragons possessed the strength of Legendary's great complete realm. The few dragons at the forefront possessed the strength of the initial and intermediate stage of the semi-sage realm. They were extremely tyrannical. I hadn't anticipated that I'd be seeing so many subdragons here, Yemo said. Very few people have seen so many subdragons roaming around after the disappearance of the dragon race. These creatures were born by being moistened in dragon energy. So, each of these dragons possessed the blood of a real dragon. They were extremely rare in the outside world. Yi Shiwen, kill these pointed-beaked dragons and extract their blood. The dragon race has the highest lifespan in the world. Even 1 drop of a real dragon's blood can increase your lifespan by 10 years. Yemo promptly said, moreover, it can also strengthen your gilded tyrant form. The dragon race possessed intrepid body. It was famous in the world for that. It had been said that one could become a peerless genius after they had bathed in dragon's blood. The strength of Yi Shiwen's gilded tyrant form would definitely increase enormously if he could absorb the dragon's blood into his gilded tyrant form. Yi Shiwen's spirit suddenly rose up after he heard this. He felt that his lifespan wasn't sufficient, even after he had entered the semi-sage realm. A person would have boundless future prospects if they could step into the semi-sage realm under the age of 30. Their lifespan also would be enough. Stepping into the sage realm wouldn't be a problem for them. However, it wasn't the same for Yi Shiwen. His lifespan was mostly consumed by the phoenix regeneration technique. He couldn't unceasingly consume the longevity dawn either. Therefore, he was very interested in increasing his lifespan in whichever way possible. Roar! Several pointed-beaked dragons opened their big mouths like a sacrificial bowl and revealed their big and ferocious teeth. They spat chilled energy. This energy condensed into energy swords and darted towards Yi Shiwen. These subdragons were born with magical powers. Yi Shiwen was greatly amazed by this. This was almost an instinctive type of magical power. So, it was far more ferocious than the acquired powers of the human race. These magical powers were often inherited from the blood. These pointed-beaked dragons might not have any wisdom. However, they could frequently display their magical powers to perfection. Yi Shiwen stretched out his big hand and weaved an energy shield before him. He had formed a huge 8 trigrams chart before himself. Bang! Repel! Bang! A huge explosion occurred as these energy swords rumbled against the 8 divinatory trigrams. However, these attacks couldn't sway the 8 divinatory trigrams and were immediately transformed into a mass of energy. Yi Shiwen's index finger and middle finger stuck together, and that mass of lingering energy suddenly transformed into energy swords and darted out. Pucci, a pointed-beaked dragon, couldn't evade the attack and was split into 2 halves. However, its death didn't make those other moderately sized subdragons cower in fear. It stirred them up on the contrary, and they rushed towards Yi Shiwen to kill him. The energy swords ripped apart the vast sky and swept towards Yi Shiwen from all directions. There was no way out of this encirclement. These pointed-beaked dragons were working together as a team, as if they were casually hunting a prey. They appeared exceptionally skillful. They possessed better mutual understanding than a usual small group of experts. So, when some attacked Yi Shiwen, the others ensured that he didn't get a chance to retreat. The corners of Yi Shiwen's mouth curled up. He realized that these ferocious animals possessed some hunting wisdom. However, it would be a big mistake on their part if they were to consider him an ordinary prey. Yi Shiwen casually made a hand gesture, and a body-size 8 trigrams chart appeared around him. These energy swords couldn't break Yi Shiwen's 8 trigrams chart. They could only produce some ripples in the 8 trigrams chart before they ultimately got submerged in it. Clang! 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 Several energy swords congealed around Yi Shiwen's body. He used a hand seal, and the energy swords went flying out in all directions. Whoosh, 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 and those fierce dragons got chopped into 2 halves. To be continued. Chapter 4:18. The heavenly source mirror absorbed the flesh and blood of these pointed-beaked dragons. Then, it extracted the real dragon's blood. However, it could only manage to extract 1/10 of a drop. Yi Shiwen exclaimed, and thought that this whole planet was covered with dragon's treasures. He would have to slaughter these subdragons to obtain these treasures since they possessed the blood of a real dragon. However, there was a gap of countless years between them and the real dragon. So, extracting real dragon's blood was easier said than done. Yi Shiwen didn't wait any longer after they extracted the blood of the real dragon. He continued to go deeper into the forest. He flew for almost half a month and penetrated very deep inside the forest. He had also killed several subdragons on the way and had done all he could to extract even a drop of the real dragon's blood. As that man had said earlier, this place was like the country of dragon race. Only subdragons were present here, but this was already enough for a lot of experts. Several experts were planning to turn one of these subdragons into their mounts. It would certainly add to their power and prestige if they could take a subdragon as their mount. Yi Shiwen heard a lot of news in this half a month's time. Some people had obtained enormous treasures, and some people had been killed by the angry dragons. Not all dragons had low wisdom. Many dragons were wise. The invasion of human experts had angered the local dragon tribes, and they had mobilized forces to slaughter these experts. Yi Shiwen started walking more carefully after he heard these things. He concealed his breath as well as his presence using the restraining breath technique. This also helped him in becoming even more sensitive to the surrounding auras. He wanted to avoid the sage experts. It would be dismal if he were to be pursued by a sage-level dragon. He would surely be able to run away from the fight. However, he didn't want to risk being pursued. Roar! The sound of a dragon's roar came from the front. Terrifying dragon energy swept into the sky. It was mixed with a demonic aura. Several experts were coming from afar. They were frantically trying to escape from a liger-type dragon that was chasing after them. It was as tall as a mountain. Its body was like a hybrid of lion and tiger. However, its head and tail appeared as those of a dragon. It possessed a substantial amount of blood of the dragon race. It was extremely tyrannical. It had already reached the peak of the late stage of semi-sage realm. It possessed 700 Tao principles inside its body. It would be no different from throwing away one's life if an ordinary expert of the semi-sage realm, who just had 500 Tao principles, were to come across such a vicious beast. The experts who were trying to flee this monster suddenly became delighted when they saw Yi Shiwen. Various colors flashed in their eyes as they simultaneously ran towards Yi Shiwen. How couldn't Yi Shiwen know their plan? These guys were trying to save themselves by luring the liger dragon towards Yi Shiwen. They would then hope for him to deal with on their behalf. One doesn't need to run the fastest when danger approaches. One just needs to run faster than others. This is a brutal truth. They would find enough time to run as long as Yi Shiwen could stop this liger dragon for a while. These people could do anything in order to survive. In fact, they would have even dumped the members of their own group at the time of danger. And Yi Shiwen was an outsider. The leader of these experts saw Yi Shiwen standing motionlessly like a silly guy. He smirked in his heart and flew towards Yi Shiwen. He secretly admitted his bad luck. He didn't know how many years' misfortune had erupted all of a sudden since he had ended up provoking this liger dragon on this day. He had merely come to seek valuable treasures. He hadn't even gotten started when he ended up attracting this liger dragon attention. The liger dragon obviously started to chase him thereafter. He just wanted this fool to resist it long enough to help them escape. However, these people weren't the least concerned with Yi Shiwen's life or death. Their humanity and righteousness had died out since they had followed the law of the jungle for several hundred years. Whoosh! The sword energy suddenly burst out from Yi Shiwen's fingertips and surged forward. It lased out and chopped those experts to pieces. Yi Shiwen's eyes looked ice cold. There wasn't a single trace of mercy in them. These people had intended to use him as a shield in order to stop this liger dragon from chasing after them. They didn't possess any good intentions. Their cruel intentions were self-evident, and so many in number that it would be hard to count them. However, he hadn't anticipated that the overbearing liger dragon would stop after he'd dispose off these experts. A somewhat pondering look flashed through its eyes. This liger dragon was quite high-handed. It possessed high wisdom. It wasn't like those other muddle-headed beasts. This liger dragon was the lord of this area. It had reached the late stage of semi-sage realm in just 100 years of cultivation. This was extraordinary. It was very close to the bloodline of the real dragon. It wasn't like those other ordinary sub-dragons which Yi Shiwen had seen so far on this planet. That's why its cultivation had reached such an extent in merely 100 years. The dragon race possessed extremely long lifespan. Even sub-dragons were no exception. Mere 100 years weren't considered long from their standards. Their lifespan was 10 times more than that of human experts. This beast wasn't inferior to the Heaven's Pride level experts of the human race. The law of the jungle was followed more strictly in the world of these demon beasts than it was in the human one. This liger dragon had come to the top, fighting all the way from the bottom in such a cruel world. And it had obtained the position of the lord of this area. So, it possessed far more fighting experience than Yi Shiwen did. It had preyed on several sub-dragons of the semi-sage realm before, and had killed them to become the lord of this area. In fact, its innate talent had attracted the attention of the ancestors of this planet. It didn't pay attention to ordinary semi-sage demon beasts. It had chased and killed several beasts of the late stage of the semi-sage realm. In fact, semi-sage subdragons had already gone extinct in this area because of it. As a result, this area had become its territory. Many subdragons used to say that it would perhaps ascend to the sage realm in less than 100 years. It would truly bring all subdragons of this area under his control if that were to happen, and it would become the genuine dragon king of this territory. However, it felt true fear and trepidation when he came face-to-face with Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen had casually killed several human experts of the semi-sage realm. It was baffled, and its eyelids jumped. It felt firmly restrained inside, as if it was staring at an ominous beast. It didn't know that Yi Shiwen had made his way here by killing God knows how many dragons. In fact, he had also killed many species related to the dragon race before he had arrived here. These were just subdragons, but thanks to his mysterious space, he had somewhat faintly comprehended the slaying dragon technique. He had started to faintly sense the weaknesses of the dragons, and could land fatal blows every time he fought with them. Yi Shiwen might not be able to perfect this slaying dragon technique in his entire life, since it was merely in the embryonic form at the moment. However, his killing intention wasn't concealed one bit. It was permeating everywhere around him, and had left the Liger dragon to tremble with fear. This abrupt surge of dread had made it feel weird. It possessed extraordinary bloodline, so it was naturally very tyrannical. It believed that it was the top-notch fierce beast in the entire world. How could some human be crueler than it? The ordinary dragons of the late stage of the semi-sage realm used to be slaughtered by it just like dogs. Yet, this human had aroused such a feeling in its heart. Yi Shiwen looked at this Liger dragon just when it was suppressing that inexplicable feeling of dread in its heart. It appeared like a hybrid of lion and tiger. Its shiny fur glowed like some lustrous metal. Its head and tail were densely covered with palm-sized cyan-colored scales. They were faintly emitting greenish light in the sunlight. Its robust body contained unfathomable power. Yi Shiwen could tell that it was the lord of this area. Perhaps the blood of the real dragon was stronger in this Liger dragon. Yi Shiwen might obtain several drops of blood by slaughtering it. The amount of blood running in its body wasn't dependent on its strength. Rather, it was related to the purity of the blood. This Liger dragon possessed an ample amount of blood of the dragon race. It was far purer than the blood of those other subdragon whom Yi Shiwen had killed earlier. It could be compared with the flood dragons. In fact, its blood was even somewhat purer than the blood of that young flood dragon which Yi Shiwen had earlier encountered. However, he didn't dare to treat it lightly. This Liger dragon was powerful enough to be able to kill a Heaven's Pride level expert. The Liger dragon couldn't keep his patience and became restless and irritated. It roared again and again. It opened its big mouth like a sacrificial bowl. It quickly rushed forward to kill. This Liger dragon had finally decided to attack Yi Shiwen first in order to gain the upper hand after it had waited for a long time. It could feel the divinities running in Yi Shiwen's body and was attracted to it. It could faintly feel that the sage realm wouldn't be far away from its reach if it could kill Yi Shiwen and swallow his body. It would be able to make a breakthrough in just a few years instead of 100. The greed had leapt up in its heart, and the Liger dragon couldn't control it any longer. Moreover, Yi Shiwen had only scared it somewhat. It wasn't a feeling of absolute danger or anything. Yi Shiwen saw this fierce dragon approach. The dragon's roar cut across the vast horizon. Its energy surged up and began to roll and boil in the sky. Its energy pierced through the vast sky and spread everywhere. It was an ominous beast. One couldn't tell how many demon beasts it had swallowed in these many years. Its murderous aura condensed and scattered everywhere. Clang! The sword in tension condensed into a long sword in Yi Shiwen's hand. He brandished the sword, and it seemed as if the world had lost its color. It seemed as if the sun and the moon had lost their brightness, like the end of the world had come to pass. Rumble! Yi Shiwen's palm swept downward along with the long sword. It cut through the space and into the body of that ominous beast. Poochie! Blood gushed out from the body of that fierce beast. Its lustrous scales should have been difficult to damage, but they had been broken by Yi Shiwen's one-sword attack. The blood splashed out. Roar, this liger dragon screamed. It had finally realized that it had messed with the wrong man, that it wasn't the top-notch beast in this world. It wasn't even the second or third best. There would always be a more savage and ominous beast than it. It felt that there was no difference between Yi Shiwen and a stubborn, ominous beast, just like the dragons were considered as a bunch of savage beasts by the humans. The liger dragon screamed endlessly. It had never come across such a ferocious man. Its body was as big as a small mountain, and Yi Shiwen's body was as thin as a piece of paper. However, an incredible power had emerged from such a slim body and had sent its mountain-like body flying. To be continued. Chapter 419. Someone would always be crueler than the liger dragon. This person in front of him was just a human, and humans were nothing more than ant-sized existences in its eyes. Blood gushed out from that very deep cut and sprinkled around. Roar! The liger dragon screamed and roared loudly. It coldly stared at Yi Shiwen with its bloodshot eyes. Yi Shiwen should be able to extract several drops of real dragon's blood after he had killed this liger dragon. This meant that his lifespan would increase by several decades. He couldn't help but be tempted by this. The liger dragon became violent after it sustained these injuries. It suddenly charged towards Yi Shiwen as it roared. Human, I will tear you to shreds. It roared loudly. The entire atmosphere began to boil endlessly. It had come so far by killing everything that had stood in its path since it was a cub. So, its accumulated murderous aura was absolutely astonishing. Yi Shiwen also rushed forth and slashed with his sword. It seemed as if his sword would destroy the world. He appeared like the reincarnation of a sword god with a golden armor draped over his body. This made him appear like a golden god of war. His long sword was constantly contended to win in his hand. Bang! Yi Shiwen brandished his long sword and roared. It seemed as if the unleashed energy would swallow the mountains and rivers. The golden rays of light covered his body and started to appear like a golden armor. Whoosh! 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 Yi Shiwen's long sword cut right into the liger dragon's body, and sparks flew in all directions. It seemed if the long sword had struck against a metal. There was a burst of roars immediately after. The scales on the body of that liger dragon had been split open by Yi Shiwen's sword attack. Yi Shiwen had attacked countless times with his sword in that split second, and the scales on the liger dragon's body had been broken due to this. The space got torn open like piece of paper wherever Yi Shiwen's sword intention went. The chaos energy leaked out from the broken space, and unceasingly opened wounds on that liger dragon's body. This was an exceptionally terrifying scene. The liger dragon became angrier as it faced such a terrifying attack. It had reached a long way by beating his opponents. Nobody had ever forced it into such a disadvantageous situation. It had bullied everyone since the beginning. However, it didn't matter whether it possessed magical powers or intrepid body in the present situation. It had been thoroughly forced into a disadvantageous position by Yi Shiwen. Its hill-sized body was a mere joke in front of Yi Shiwen. Bang! The collision occurred, and the liger dragon went flying by the terrifying force. Yi Shiwen just stood motionless while the loud metallic sound of the collision between gold and iron reverberated. Rumble! The entire void crumbled. This scene was just too horrible. The divine senses of the subdragons, which were lurking in the surroundings, were retracted. These two individuals were extremely ferocious existences of their generation. It was difficult to tell who was fiercer among these two. Yet, it was clear to everyone that they might have to suffer a calamity if they dared to infuriate these two individuals at this moment. This liger dragon definitely possesses the blood of a pure real dragon. That's why its body is so formidable. Yimo said. Yi Shiwen nodded. He was certainly very aware of the capabilities of his own body. He knew that he could effortlessly tear a god or a devil with his bare hands. Not to mention that an ordinary person would be dismembered by a mere slap of his. He had been able to come this far. This was enough to prove that his body was extraordinary. The Liger Dragon was also extraordinary. However, it wasn't a pure-blood dragon. In fact, considering its current strength, even Yi Shiwen wouldn't have been its match if it were a pure-blood dragon. Yi Shiwen's current realm would have been insufficient in that case. This was his weak point. He possessed incomparable fighting strength, let alone the experts of the same realm. Even the experts of the higher realms weren't his match. He usually didn't pay attention to ordinary experts, but he could fall in a very difficult situation if he were to come across a top-tier Heaven's Pride level expert of a higher realm. He wasn't afraid of anyone in the same realm. However, his realm was always lacking in comparison to his opponent. This was his biggest worry. Yi Shiwen's eyes turned ice cold. The dragon race had lived up to their incredible reputation. This was an impure subdragon, but it still wasn't something an average expert could deal with. Obediently hand over the real dragon's blood to me, Yi Shiwen softly said. Roar! Human, you are courting death. The Liger Dragon immediately became angry. It also coveted Yi Shiwen's divinities, but this was its personal matter. However, its pride would never allow someone to treat it as a prey. It certainly wouldn't let someone kill itself. The Liger Dragon faced upwards and roared. It seemed as if it would grab and break the universe with its front claws. It was alone, but its overwhelming murderous aura blotted out the sky and covered the earth like a magnificent army with thousands of men and horses. Die! Yi Shiwen shouted loudly. He pulled out his golden form and rushed towards the Liger Dragon to kill it. His golden divinities surged forth and blotted out the sky and covered the earth like a gigantic sea wave. The absorbed intention mixed with his divinities and soared in the vast sky. It shattered the space in its wake. Rumble! The heaven and the earth trembled. The fight between these two individuals had reached its climax. Their murderous auras swept down from the heaven, and their fighting intentions cut across the vast sky. Yi Shiwen had obtained the upper hand in the present situation. However, this Liger Dragon was no pushover either. It could kill an ordinary expert of the late stage of the semi-sage realm in just one move and swallow them whole. It could have become the overlord of this region if it hadn't come across the wrong person. In fact, entering the sage realm would have been a piece of cake for it in time. Yi Shiwen had completely suppressed this Liger Dragon, and it had fallen into a grossly disadvantageous position. However, it hadn't been easy for Yi Shiwen to kill it in a short period of time. Puchi! Yi Shiwen's long sword opened a huge wound on that Liger Dragon's body, and its blood splashed out. The Liger Dragon roared, since its body had been nearly pierced by Yi Shiwen's attack. An ordinary iron sword wouldn't have been able to move its hair. However, it knew that Yi Shiwen would destroy its internal organs after his sword had penetrated its body. In fact, it wouldn't be able to save its soul either. Suddenly, the demon energy condensed around the Liger Dragon's body. It instantly spat out dragon breath. Only a purebred dragon or a dragon with its bloodline close to the dragon race could spit dragon breath. A pureblood dragon could instinctively spit the dragon breath. However, a subdragon could only spit dragon breath if its bloodline was very close to the dragon race. But it must practice to an extremely profound realm in order to display such supernatural powers. Several martial arts of the dragon race essentially needed one to make great efforts to move in the direction of attained pure blood. This situation was extremely common in the universe. There was a time in the ancient era when the ancestors of various races possessed invincible strength. However, these present younger generations were striving to attain pure blood in order to reach closer to their ancestors. The atmosphere began to burn under the enormous power of this dragon breath. The dreadful divine power was overflowing from Yi Shiwen's long sword. He was much shorter than this Liger Dragon. However, he had been crushing it and suppressing it like a mountain, and the space would collapse and break into small pieces wherever he went. Bang! Yi Shiwen's long sword defeated the dragon breath. He stood on the Liger Dragon's body and slashed open a very deep wound on it. Its bones became visible through the wound. The Liger Dragon's tough body was cut like a piece of clay by Yi Shiwen's sword attack. The long sword cut open a huge wound on its body, and blood started to gush out of it. The Liger Dragon's hill-sized body rumbled to the ground under the influence of the power of Yi Shiwen's sword. Yi Shiwen didn't hold back this time. A Han seal appeared in the sky and pounded on its body like a huge mountain. Bang! It pounded on the Liger Dragon's skull and cracked it open. The brain matter gushed out from its broken head. It was an exceptionally dreadful scene. The Liger Dragon screamed continually. No strength was left in its body. Yi Shiwen's attack had rendered it powerless. Clang! Yi Shiwen stretched out his palm, and a long sword condensed in it. His expression didn't change. Finally, it was the time to give a final blow to this Liger Dragon. Afterwards, he could extract the several drops of real dragon's blood that ran through its body. Yi Shiwen had become somewhat excited. This was the land of dragons. So, it was like a treasure planet for ambitious people. Of course, he wasn't the only one who was contemplating to extract the blood of real dragon. This place would continue to witness incredible killing expeditions once the news about this place would gradually spread out. This place would inevitably witness bloodbath everywhere. However, Yi Shiwen had no relation with all that. He would leave after he had found the things he needed. But the killing expeditions might continue here for 100 or 200 years, until the dragons had been completely wiped off from the surface of this planet. Or perhaps until the local dragon tribes killed or scared away the invading human experts, demon beasts, and the star beasts. Yi Shiwen was about to kill this Liger Dragon when a startling and divine rainbow suddenly fell from the sky and impacted upon its body. Bang! That fierce Liger Dragon was killed in a flash. It had been eradicated efficiently, without any wasted effort. A group of people arrived immediately after. They were treading on rainbow lights. This was a group of formidable human experts. Each of them was a young expert of approximately 25 or 26 years old. Their auras surged up one by one. They were the top experts of the late stage of the semi-sage realm. Every individual had condensed 600 to 700 Tao principles. The late stage of the semi-sage realm only required 500 Tao principles. Theoretically speaking, one could prepare to make a breakthrough into the sage realm after they had condensed 500 Tao principles. However, only a few people were in such a hurry to make a breakthrough to the sage realm. That was because the semi-sage realm could accommodate up to 999 principles. So, one could truly complete the semi-sage realm only after they had condensed 999 principles. They could thereafter break through to the sage realm and reach the peak of the initial stage of the sage realm. In other words, one wouldn't be considered at the bottom of the sage realm after the breakthrough unless they had condensed 999 principles. Therefore, every ambitious expert chose to make an attempt to have a breakthrough after they had condensed 999 principles. Moreover, these people seemed to have practiced for up to 100 or 200 years. So, they would be considered as elites among elites since they had practiced to such an extent. To be continued. Chapter 420. These people might be the top elites. They were surely a bit older among the other disciples of this session. However, they were absolute elites. In fact, they weren't much inferior to the Heaven's Pride level experts. And they could even force a Heaven's Pride level expert to retreat if they were to join hands. Every force, like the true Martial University, considered the time of more than 100 years to calculate the capability of an expert. In fact, comparisons were often drawn between the older disciples of adjacent sessions. That was because the difference between the older disciples of different sessions wasn't too big. This disparity was indeed quite evident in the beginning. But it gets difficult to make breakthroughs after the passage of several decades. In fact, sometimes it takes more than 10 years or even several decades. Hence, the gap between the older disciples becomes rather non-existent at that point of time. This group of 7 people was headed by a young man. He was approximately 27 or 28 years old in appearance. He looked handsome and extraordinary. He had the vigor of a dragon and the ferocity of a tiger. His overconfidence was reflecting from his body language. This liger dragon belongs to us. You should hurry and leave. We don't wish to make things difficult for you. A woman stepped forward from this man's back and spoke in an indifferent manner. She didn't even look at Yi Shiwen as she said that. Yi Shiwen was just an ordinary expert of the initial stage of semi-sage realm in her opinion one. So, he didn't hold the authority to talk to them on equal terms. Yi Shiwen felt a little baffled. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. What was this? They were trying to steal his prey. However, their facial expressions showed as if they were doing charity. A fierce light flashed through Yi Shiwen's eyes. His countenance turned cold as he looked at the man in front of him, and the corners of his mouth curled up to reveal a smile of mockery. There were 4 men and 3 women among those 7 people. Each of these individuals was an outstanding expert. Their imposing auras were quite oppressive, and their imposing auras simultaneously acted upon him to overwhelm him once they realized that Yi Shiwen wasn't leaving. The air around his body distorted thereafter. Why are you gawking like a fool? We're in a good mood today. But don't blame us for our impolite behavior if you don't leave. That woman reminded Yi Shiwen quite gently. Get lost quickly, another man shouted rudely. He was attentively looking at the corpse of that liger dragon, since they would soon get to extract the drops of the real dragon's blood. It was nothing less than a heavy treasure for them. A person could cultivate only to a certain extent of time. These people were outstanding experts. However, they were also trapped in the limitation of time. So, they would also have to embrace death on the road of cultivation at some point. I am the one who killed this liger dragon. So, it should obviously be mine, Yi Shiwen solemnly said. The killing intention was already boiling in his heart. They wanted the real dragon's blood, but so did Yi Shiwen. There was no problem if they had killed it. However, Yi Shiwen had killed it with his own efforts. Moreover, they had arrived late and still wanted to snatch away the corpse. He couldn't possibly allow such a thing to happen. We have pursued this liger dragon for 3 days. We were about to kill it when you came out and stole our prey. Do you still need a reason? A man frowned as he coldly said. His ice-cold vision pierced through Yi Shiwen. Good. You are so shameless. I haven't seen a shameless person like you in a while. Yi Shiwen burst into laughter. His killing intention was still seething. They had pursued this liger dragon for 3 days. What a joke! This liger dragon had been present inside its lair. What was the need to pursue it? They were obviously making things up thoughtlessly. According to the division of territories which was agreed upon, this area falls under our jurisdiction. You will fall prey to our crueler methods if you refuse to leave. The leader of the group spoke up. He wasn't being aggressive. He was clearly ignoring Yi Shiwen since he had said this without even looking Yi Shiwen in the eye. Division? What division? I don't know when that happened. Yi Shiwen frowned and said. Yi Shiwen pondered secretly. It's possible that this might have happened. No wonder he had seen other experts flying towards different regions in the past. They hadn't merely gathered at one place and gone their own ways. It might be possible that this land had been partitioned at the time when they had first landed on this enormous planet. However, he was unaware of it since he hadn't arrived at that time. He had arrived later. However, he had nothing to do with this. He hadn't participated in the partition. So, it was basically just a trifling matter for him. This partition was nothing more than a joke in the eyes of a genuinely strong powerhouse. There would be no problems as long as there were no treasures involved. However, everyone would indulge in a fight if some treasure were to emerge. The so-called partition of land would then be reduced to a big joke. There's no point in talking nonsense with him. Just kill him and end this farce. An impatient expert at the back couldn't tolerate any more and shouted, he should have a lot of good stuff on him. Let's seize them together. Sun rises from the east. An expert shouted loudly. Suddenly, that expert launched an attack. His palm congealed into a fist and rumbled towards Yi Shiwen. A heat wave struck against everyone's face. The red-colored divine beam condensed into a huge, dazzling sun as it swept down towards Yi Shiwen. This expert had practiced a technique known as Red Sun Tyrant Fist technique. It was extremely overbearing. An average person simply couldn't resist such an attack. He seemed like an unparalleled and unstoppable tyrant. The way of the tyrant was something that could force the entire world into submission and could crush any form of resistance. However, the basic requirement for this entailed that one must have enough strength. A person could become overbearing and invincible once they possessed enough strength. However, such a person was bound to suffer a loss when they would come across someone stronger than them. And this guy had unfortunately come across the equally tyrannical Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen had also attacked. He had used the move Divine Dragon Flings its tail this time. Yi Shiwen's arm transformed into a bulky dragon, and this dragon started to swing its tail. An endless sea of divinities swept down and began to boil. The faint sounds of winds and thunders erupted as the sea of divinities surged forth. Crash bang! The space had been torn open from the middle, almost as if it were a painting. And then the broken pieces of space rolled down like a mountain avalanche. Rumble! The big and round sun looked extremely brilliant as it descended from the sky. However, it was easily destroyed and dispersed by the mountain-like dragon's tail, since it was made up of endless divinities. That big sun was the creative concept of the red sun tyrant fist that this expert had practiced. However, it was no match for Yi Shiwen's dragon's tail attack, and got annihilated with ease. A creative concept is the embodiment of an expert's knowledge of the heavenly laws and the martial arts. And his creative concept had been destroyed just now. This had made him so depressed that he wanted to vomit blood. He restrained himself from puking blood and came close to fainting from that. However, the dragon's tail attack didn't stop there. The heaven-shaking might of this attack pressed down. The heaven and the earth began to tremble and shattered into small pieces. That expert's entire arm was swept away by Yi Shiwen's dragon's tail. His arm got turned into a mass of blood fog. Ah! That expert screamed as his body was sent flying upside down. His body wasn't transformed into a mass of blood fog like his arm. However, the bones in his entire body had been shattered by the impact. "Everyone, we mustn't let him off," the leader shouted loudly as he witnessed this. He had finally realized that this man of the initial stage of semi-sage realm wasn't an ordinary person, since he hadn't shown any weakness while facing them. Moreover, he hadn't collapsed at the first blow. In fact, he might have killed them by now if they were alone instead of being in a group. He was possibly a Heaven's Pride level expert of this generation. He faintly recalled a person named Yi Shiwen who had come into the limelight half a year ago. It was rumored that he was merely at half-step Legendary's great complete realm when he had routed Pang Yongbo's offensive. However, Pang Yongbo was a Heaven's Pride level expert of this generation. He was an invincible expert in his realm. However, he had nearly been beaten to death by Yi Shiwen even though he was at a much lower realm at that time. Yi Shiwen genuinely possessed tyrannical strength. It was simply hard to imagine. He sucked a lump of cold air as he thought of this. However, he still didn't hesitate. He didn't change his mind because they had already ended up provoking Yi Shiwen by attempting to steal his loot. They hadn't only offended Yi Shiwen, but had also tried to suppress him. Moreover, they had tried to attack him after that. This had incited Yi Shiwen's retaliation. Thereafter, one of his teammates had his arm reduced to blood fog, while the bones of his body had been shattered. So, he couldn't back down since that would shatter the confidence of his team's members. He didn't have much to think in this situation. He had only one option, and that was to kill Yi Shiwen. He took the initiative and launched an attack on Yi Shiwen. He brandished his long blade. His temperament had changed entirely. He didn't look dull anymore. A strange, evil aura swept out of his body on the contrary. The long blade swept down, and the outcome was world-shaking. An endless amount of evil energy condensed and soared up. It blotted out the sky and covered the earth as it swept down towards Yi Shiwen to engulf him. He had practiced a power technique of the evil ways called Evil Heart Blade. The blade technique was termed as Evil Heart since it could turn a person evil. Its speed was extremely quick. It had unleashed dozens of blades in a flash. These blades chopped down the entire space between the heaven and earth. He didn't have much confidence after he had kind of guessed Yi Shiwen's identity. However, he had attacked with all his strength. He would have died quite miserably if he hadn't done so. Those experts behind him didn't know what had happened to their leader. They didn't understand why a powerful man like him was giving so much importance to this boy. It definitely didn't seem from this attack that their leader had held back. However, they didn't dare to say anything and promptly rushed towards Yishuan. It was an incredible spectacle in which the heaven and earth was left to tremble. The entire space in front of Yishuan had completely shattered. Hardly a bit of it was left intact. Endless divine beams and murderous auras swept down from the sky. Yishuan finally launched an attack this time. However, he merely resorted to a mediocre palm attack. It didn't create any gorgeous scene since it was just an average palm attack. Yet, those incoming divine beams pounded upon his palms and got blocked. They couldn't advance even a step further. "Huh!" Yishuan shouted in a low voice. His big hand suddenly went up. It transformed into a big golden hand and illuminated the surroundings with its golden brilliance. It seemed as if the god himself had stretched out his heavenly hand upon the mortal world. Those divine beams didn't stand a chance and got caught in an instant. Then, the divine beams got crushed without posing any hindrance whatsoever. Everyone suddenly got terrified. Those people finally understood why their leader had suddenly taken this boy so seriously. This attack had been an exceptional killer move. They felt as if Yishuan was a peerless god killer, a very frightening god killer. They wouldn't have become so agitated if Yishuan had defeated them one at a time. They did believe themselves to be invincible. However, they didn't dare to call themselves invincible. Many stronger people lived in the same generation. Yet, Yishuan had assumed an incredibly powerful stance this time, and had instantly defeated their joint offensive. Such strength was simply beyond their very imaginations. Moreover, he wasn't even a sage expert. He was merely an expert of the initial stage of semi-sage realm. Nothing more. To be continued. Chapter 4:21. This was like facing someone whose achievement would always be higher than yours. You would never be able to surpass them, no matter what. And this kind of desperation hits one the hardest. "Let's join together and take him down," an expert shouted loudly. This was the so-called chasing a wild goose all day long, and then getting one's eyes pecked at the very end. Their teamwork was excellent. This wasn't their first or second time attempting to steal someone else's prey. In fact, this team of 7 people had no rival as long as they were working together, unless they were dealing with a sage expert. They were dependent on their numerical strength, and the fact that each of these individuals was an expert, and they had never been forced into a disadvantageous position. They had never suffered a loss either. However, they had come across a freak like Yishuan this time. The more they fought with Yishuan, the more afraid they became. It didn't make a big difference to him whether there were more people or less, unless his opponents were at the same level as him. However, an ordinary Heaven's Pride level expert would have met with a painful consequence if they were in his place. These experts shortly realized that they were no match for Yishuan. So, they forged ahead and launched their final attacks with full strength. Yishuan sneered. A Hanzon seal was formed. It then crashed down from above. Those attacks got crushed. They couldn't even reach near Yishuan's body. These experts were soon killed by Yishuan. He plundered their stuff from their bodies thereafter. Yishuan took a look at these items. He had obtained several items. There were more than 300,000 primary spirit dawn in total. This much stock could be used for practicing up to 100 years, and even then it wouldn't get depleted in its entirety. These items could easily solve Yishuan's desperate energy needs. He had left the inner core of that white dwarf with Hua Minghan, since she'd require a great amount of energy in order to make a breakthrough. Yishuan went inside the Liger Dragon's lair after he had collected its corpse. Dragons were fond of collecting precious treasures. This Liger Dragon was a sub-dragon. However, it was no exception to this affliction. Every dragon that possessed the wisdom of the dragon race had this habit of collecting treasures. Yishuan trod on the rainbow light and landed inside the Liger Dragon's lair. The sub-dragons present in the surroundings wouldn't dare to wander around this place. They had first been scared away by the battle between Yi Shiwen and that liger dragon, and then by the battle between Yi Shiwen and those 7 experts. So, they wouldn't dare to come near this place. Yi Shiwen was first planning to undergo closed-door training in this liger dragon's lair. He would also extract the drops of the real dragon's blood from its body. Fighting for so long with those enemies hadn't gone in vain. The liger dragon's lair was inside a cave, and this cave was hidden among the weeds, so it wasn't visible from outside. Moreover, the liger dragon had always been very careful while he'd enter and exit the lair, and had ensured not to destroy these weeds. These were merely weeds, but they were still contaminated by dragon's blood and aura. Therefore, they were no ordinary weeds. Yi Shiwen saw a vast rice field outside the cave. Yes, that's right, a vast lush green rice field. It looked extremely beautiful as the long wheat stalks fluttered in the winds. Yi Shiwen was in shock when he saw this scene. Could it be that this liger dragon was a vegetarian? However, it wasn't an ordinary rice field. These ears of the wheat appeared blood red, with a tint of greenish-blue color. Yi Shiwen gasped. Strong spirit energy was floating in the surroundings. He felt a strange comfort throughout his body, as if all the arteries and veins in his body had suddenly opened up. Yi Shiwen immediately realized that these ears of wheat weren't ordinary ones. In fact, this wasn't ordinary rice. It's Azura blood rice. Yi Mo uttered in astonishment. Yi Shiwen, you've hit the jackpot. You found Azura blood rice. Azura blood rice? What is that? Yi Shiwen asked. It's a much-cherished variety of rice. In fact, it's extremely rare in the devil world too. Only a few top aristocrats of the devil race get to eat it as food. Yi Mo replied. It's not surprising that those guys dared to run their hands on the mustache of this liger dragon. They had done this for the sake of this treasure. Even dying for this item wouldn't be unfair. Yi Shiwen heard Yi Mo's explanation and finally understood what Azura blood rice was. Rice was the most common of food items for the human race. Basically, a vast majority of people were dependent on it for their survival. However, the martial arts experts were an exception. They didn't need to eat food for survival. They transformed the food into the spirit energy for the sustenance of their life. In fact, there would be no problem even if they didn't eat anything for hundreds of years as long as they possessed spirit dawn or spirit stones. Moreover, one couldn't imagine the amount of food they would have to eat in order to satisfy their energy needs. There's a so-called saying, immortals eat energy as food. This was indeed the case. However, this was just one of the many reasons. The most important reason was that these experts used to temper their bodies. So, they were mostly afraid of their bodies getting infected by the foods which contained Hotian energy. The experts could become Xiantian from Hotian after they had established the bridge to connect with the world. Then, they could use the Xiantian energy to wash their bodies clean. Henceforth, they would become brighter and wiser and would no longer remain ignorant. Therefore, a majority of experts didn't regard food as something important. In fact, some people ignored food altogether. They couldn't eat ordinary food. However, this didn't mean that they couldn't eat some spirit fruits. These rare heavenly materials weren't only pure and uncontaminated. They could promote one's cultivation as well. Those genuine experts often arrange the spiritual materials on the table rather than ordinary food. The impurities decreased with an increase in the grade of the item, and the benefits to their cultivation would also increase significantly. Rice also had different varieties apart from the ordinary ones. Many experts used to cultivate special rice for the members of their family. The children of many aristocratic families, or the disciples of big forces, grew up eating such rare varieties of rice since childhood. Such pure diet was capable of washing their bodies entirely. It would improve their physique as well. They would become far more ferocious than their peers as a result. However, the cultivation of such varieties of rice wasn't easy. The True Martial University also used to cultivate different variety of rice many years ago. However, they lost the area for the rice's cultivation with the passage of time. In fact, even the methods of cultivation had gone extinct. Not many people could consume these items of luxury even in a massive place like the Devil World. The Azura blood rice was the most famous variety of rice. Only a few top aristocrats of the devil race had the resources to consume it. It was said that this Azura blood rice was originally cultivated by the outstanding Azura Devil Lord. In fact, it was initially circulated only among the peak Azura lords of the Azura race. However, it slowly began to spread among other aristocratic clans of the devil race with the passage of time. However, it was very surprising to see it grow on this planet. It didn't matter whether its cultivation method had been developed by the Azura Devil Lord. It was bound to have a great origin if it had any connection with the Devil Lord. Yimo's previous master was also a Devil King. In fact, he was the lord of the entire Devil World. Yishuan hadn't seen the Devil King. However, he had seen the Demon Emperor. He looked exceptionally outstanding, and it had seemed as if he was the lord of the entire world. Yishuan had only seen a wisp of his soul. However, his profound image had engraved itself inside Yishuan's mind since the time he had seen him. He looked like a real man, like a man of character. The Devil King and the Demon Emperor were characters of the same level. If the Demon Emperor was so outstanding, then how could the Devil King be any different? The biggest advantage of this Azura blood rice is that it can refine one's body and toughen it. The body can become tyrannical to an unfathomable extent if refined with the nourishment obtained from this Azura blood rice for many years. The results will be even more incredible if an Azura consumes this Azura blood rice. Yimo explained, "This is a big fortune for you. Your gilded tyrant form is already very tyrannical, and it will become invincible in the future if you consume this Azura blood rice for many years. That Liger Dragon must have built its lair here because of this reason only," Yimo said. "But the quantity of Azura blood rice isn't enough." Yi Shiwen spoke as he looked in the direction of the Azura blood rice. This Azura blood rice was indeed present here in abundance. In fact, it was spread over dozens of acres. So, it was sufficient for an ordinary person. However, Yishuan could consume that much of rice in one go. This variety of rice was surely outstanding. However, it required many years of consumption to show the results. That's enough to let us nurture the seeds. We can plant it inside the heavenly source mirror. Give it some time, and then you can have as much as you want. Yimo laughed out loud and continued, "I don't even remember the sheer number and variety of the plants and spirit fruits my master had planted inside the heavenly source mirror back then. He had even planted various kinds of rice, many of which are already extinct. The Devil World had gone out on an expedition to conquer the 10,000 worlds in the past, and everything that was looted along the way had been placed inside the heavenly source mirror by the Devil King. I know the cultivation methods for various extinct or endangered species of vegetables and fruits." Yimo triumphantly said, "In those days, my master had cultivated great amounts of different varieties of rice to enrich his body." Yishuan was secretly flabbergasted after he had heard this. The Devil Lord was really high-handed. One must know that it was quite difficult to find the methods to cultivate so many different varieties of rice. Moreover, it required huge amounts of natural resources for cultivation process. Ordinary people couldn't consume such precious foods. Only a few top lords in the Devil World could consume it. However, the Devil Lord had cultivated rare variety of rice to enrich his body. One could clearly see the huge disparity. However, the Azura blood rice can't be cultivated without a great amount of spirit energy. The Azura blood rice is growing here. This indicates that the spiritual arteries must be running under this place. So, we will need to dig out the spiritual arteries from this place. And then, we will put it inside the heavenly source mirror," Yimo said as he laughed. "However, it will be better if you can grab as many spiritual arteries as possible in order to get unlimited supply of energy for Azura blood rice in the future. In fact, it will be better if you obtain dragon arteries." Yishuan forced a smile. He even lacked primary spirit dawn, most of the times forget about the spiritual arteries. How could it be easy to get one's hands on the spiritual arteries? To be continued. Chapter 422. No one would dare to grab them if these spiritual arteries didn't have enough strength. That was because these spiritual arteries were often deeply ingrained in the earth, and slight carelessness might invoke the earth's rebound. However, one could still try to cut off a small portion of it. Yi Shiwen soon discovered that he couldn't move the grounded spiritual arteries. It was as if these spiritual arteries had been locked up by someone. Moreover, these weren't merely spiritual arteries, but dragon arteries that had been locked underground. Yi Shiwen performed soul search by sweeping down his divine sense to explore the underground. He saw that a thick and sturdy dragon's vein was locked inside the ground by a matrix formation. So, it was very difficult to move it. Yi Shiwen was in a state of shock. A dragon's vein was more like the source of the spiritual arteries. Even a force such as the Yuan school didn't possess dragon vein. In fact, a force wouldn't even be able to restrict a dragon's vein if they were to somehow obtain it. What could one possibly speak of capturing one and keeping it locked up underground? The dragon's vein didn't possess spiritual wisdom. It didn't have the capability to think and comprehend either. However, it possessed spiritual intelligence and instincts, the likes of which an average person simply couldn't match. Yi Shiwen, this place seems to be extraordinary. There must be a big problem here. Yimo cautioned. Dragon's vein was definitely an incredible thing. It could make a super big school flourish. Everything would flourish in the vicinity of its placement. The vegetation would become lush. The spirit fruits would start to grow. Moreover, the demon beasts in the vicinity would become intelligent and extraordinary. Even the human beings born in a place like that would possess outstanding innate talent. These were some of the advantages of the dragon's vein. However, this dragon's vein had been locked up, and only a little of its spirit energy was leaking out to nourish the Azura blood rice. So, where did the remaining energy go? It was hard to say which Almighty had senselessly used the dragon's vein to support such a small amount of Azura blood rice. No one would trap the dragon's vein under such a mediocre place if not for the Azura blood rice. Yimo sighed with emotion and said. Yi Shiwen sighed with emotion as well. A dragon's vein had died in the past, and it had left behind the dragon's essence and a club for people to fight over. However, this dragon's vein was locked underground. Yi Shiwen was spellbounded as he explored this place with his divine sense. He walked in the direction of the point that was leaking out the spirit energy from the dragon's vein, and he was surprised to find that it had led to that liger dragon's lair. He walked along the lair and arrived at an extremely strange and precipitous cave. And he found that the spirit energy had become thicker in the depths of the cave. It looked average and normal from outside, but it was like an abode of immortals on the inside. It wasn't surprising that the liger dragon was so protective of this place. That's why it didn't leave this place. In fact, it hadn't even dared to damage the weeds present at the entrance of the lair. Perhaps it was afraid of this place being discovered by other entities. Bang! It wasn't clear how far Yi Shiwen had walked when he knocked against a transparent strong barrier. Buried earth sword, of sword intention, suddenly bubbled out of Yi Shiwen's hand. It swept out towards the barrier to break it. Bang! Yi Shiwen's sword intention struck the barrier, but couldn't break it. This barrier was very hard, far beyond his imagination. It was very difficult to break this barrier. So, what kind of stuff would be present behind it? There could possibly be some extraordinary stuff, and it may have been left behind by that Almighty who had locked up the dragon's vein. Yi Shiwen became excited with anticipation. The dragon's vein didn't possess the spiritual wisdom. However, it possessed instincts. So, it could easily rip apart a great sage realm expert if the same was caught off guard. Moreover, some treasure had been left behind this barrier by a powerful person. A person so powerful that he hadn't only grabbed this dragon's vein, but had also managed to lock it up. How could this treasure be lowly? It might be possible that this almighty person had left behind this cave mansion. What should we do about this barrier? I struck it with the entirety of my strength, but it still didn't break, Yi Shiwen said. The entire cave was dark. However, he could see anything as long as there was any trace of light. Therefore, he brightened the cave to his eyes with the help of his martial power. Yi Shiwen saw the barrier before him. It looked like a purple-colored wall. There's still a way. I know a mnemonic chant. I will pass it to you, and then you will be able to break this barrier, Yimo said. Moreover, this barrier has already sustained some cracks. So, it won't be difficult to break it open as long as we have the appropriate method. Yi Shiwen was surprised to see that the entire barrier was densely covered with marks and lines. They must have appeared on its surface after being attacked countless times. Yi Shiwen assumed that this must have been done by that liger dragon. He speculated that the liger dragon didn't know countless secrets that a freak like Yimo did. However, it must have guessed that there could possibly be some precious treasures on the other side of the barrier. So, it may have tried different methods to break the barrier. That's why this solid barrier was densely covered with marks. Moreover, it was clear that it had tried for more than 1 or 2 days. In fact, it must have tried to break this barrier for more than 10 or even 20 years. Yi Shiwen had initially anticipated that this liger dragon had settled at this place for that Azura blood rice. However, now it seemed more probable that it had done so because of this cave. Yimo spoke up and read out a secret technique. Yi Shiwen memorized it and began to deduce it inside his mysterious space. Yi Shiwen perfected this secret technique and became exceptionally proficient at it after he had burned hundreds of primary spirit dawn. In fact, this kind of barrier opening technique wasn't rare. It could be found everywhere, and everyone could learn this skill. After all, who would dare to say that they wouldn't come across such fortuitous encounters in their lifetime? So, people would often learn an appropriate barrier opening technique at the time they learned to make matrix formations. However, there were subtle differences between the techniques taught by different clans. The barrier looked ordinary from the outset. However, it was mostly reflecting the depth of this place's background. Ordinary, random cultivators could also hit the jackpot and obtain an exceptionally good power technique. However, theirs wouldn't be as detailed as the barrier present here. A higher number of details in the barrier reflected that it protected a place with a deeper background. The true Martial University also had its own version of the secret hand techniques to solve matrix formations. Yi Shiwen had naturally learned it. He had learned one in Yuan School as well. The Yuan School's technique was obviously far inferior to the true Martial Universities. Moreover, he was a core disciple, so he had received high-level attention as a Heaven's Pride level expert. The secret hand technique that he had learned wasn't an ordinary technique. In fact, it was far superior to the one the other disciples of the true Martial University had learned. However, the technique that Yimo had just taught him was far superior and sophisticated to the true Martial Universities. Therefore, Yi Shiwen sat cross-legged in front of the barrier, and he was determined to break it. Time passed gradually, and a total of 10 days passed in an instant. Bang, a big explosion occurred, and endless energy waves swept out. Yi Shiwen's clothes started to blow and make fluttering sounds. Yi Shiwen was troubled for 10 days, but he had finally made the barrier to disappear. He opened his eyes and suddenly jumped with joy. Fortunately, Yimo had taught him the secret hand technique. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to break it even if he had tried for an indefinite amount of time. It wasn't the treasure house that Yi Shiwen had initially imagined it to be. Rather, it was a cave mansion. It had a stone chair and a stone bed. In fact, it appeared like a small bedroom. There were traces of someone's presence inside this abode. Yi Shiwen made a speculation. It was probably a restricted practice area of some great powerhouse. These stones are obviously more than 100,000 years old. In fact, this place belongs to a timeline that came to happen long before that wind dragon occupied this planet. I suppose that this planet isn't the lair of the wind dragon. It may be an abode of some almighty being. And this is a restricted place where he must have undergone closed-door training. In short, it is quite marvelous. Yimo heaved a sigh and spoke. Yi Shiwen got secretly speechless. This entire situation would become even more complicated if this was genuinely an abode of some almighty. In fact, this would perhaps draw a higher number of experts, and it would particularly draw the human experts. Yi Shiwen thought about the tangled and complicated scene when those forces would arrive here like storms. This gave him a slight headache. What's this? Yi Shiwen saw a dark-colored and oval-shaped seed that was kept on the table. This seed was covered in a mysterious light and lay quietly on the table. Yi Shiwen felt somewhat strange. He swept out his divine sense inside the cave mansion. He couldn't find any other things. It might have been a restricted abode, but it was probably just a place to perform training. The owner must have sealed it off before they had left. However, the seed on top of the table had caught his attention. This seed was protected inside a layer of mysterious light, but Yi Shiwen could tell that it still had vitality. He was extremely amazed by this. One must know that this abode had been abandoned a very, very long time ago. And even if the seed had been here since the time that Wind Dragon had occupied this planet, then it would effectively mean that it had been here for more than 10,000 years. What kind of a seed could survive for such a long time? This is an extraordinary seed. However, I have no clue what it is. Yimo came out from the heavenly source mirror. He carefully examined it for some time. However, he couldn't determine the origin of this seed. However, he was certain that it was an extraordinary seed. He picked up the seed and examined it for a long time, but he still didn't have a clue of what it really was. He had already been promoted to a sage tool, so he could condense himself as a solid entity instead of the phantom form he had earlier been in. This was a huge progress. However, this was just the beginning. He would be able to practice in the future by being able to treat the Heaven Source Mirror as his main body, and his practice speed would obviously be extremely quick. He would advance by leaps and bounds without any problems. He would become a dreaded expert as long as he could mobilize the power of the Heavenly Source Mirror. In fact, the prospect of becoming a spirit cultivator wasn't a problem for him. He often used to think of this possibility in the past. However, he hadn't anticipated that he would land in Yi Shiwen's hands at that time. And now he couldn't run away after having fallen into Yi Shiwen's hands. However, he and Yi Shiwen had come to get along very well over these many years, and his initial sad mood had also disappeared gradually. However, you can still cultivate it since its vitality is persevered inside the mysterious light. Give this and the Azure blood rice to me. I will cultivate them. I can't determine the origin of this seed at the moment. However, I should be able to determine it once it sprouts. Yimo spoke quite confidently. Okay, Yi Shiwen nodded. But we can't even move this underground dragon's vein. So, how will we cultivate the Azure blood rice? Yi Shiwen felt jealous by looking at the Azure blood rice. These things didn't show instant results, but its effects would be immense if consumed over the years. So, he wasn't willing to give up on it so easily. Nothing can be done now. We can only use the primary spirit dawn for now. The cultivation of this rice will someday expand once we obtain 1 or 2 spiritual arteries. To be continued. Chapter 423. The human experts, demon beasts, and the star beast experts had arrived on this huge planet, and they had set off a scene of bloodbath in all directions. Countless news spread out that numerous experts had arrived and were roaming about the planet. Countless experts would wage war in every 3 or 5 days. A reckless expert had stolen the Subdragon King's egg a few days ago. He had then fled. The Subdragon King had recently given birth to this dragon egg. So, this theft caused a huge sensation, and the Dragon King led its grandiose army of subdragons and killed that human expert as well as the experts of the other forces. This gave rise to complete chaos. The dragon egg was eventually taken back. However, this was only the prologue, nothing more. Bloodbath could be seen everywhere along with the arrival of more and more experts on this huge planet. And the discovery of that ancient Almighty's palace had further triggered countless more speculations. It is said that this palace has existed since countless years. In fact, it was here even before that wind dragon occupied this planet and built its lair. So, there was now news about the palace of the Almighty in addition to the wind dragon's lair. Therefore, more and more people were unable to sit idle, and they arrived one after another to reap the benefits. It appeared as if someone was deliberately instigating such rumors. And battles broke out everywhere, and at all times. The initial bloodbath gradually transformed into utter chaos, and everyone was left to feel insecure in this situation. 1 year's time quietly passed by amidst this slaughter. Some people died, while many displayed their talents in this 1 year's time. The reputations of several experts of the younger generation had also risen in this series of battles. Pang Yongbo, whom Yi Shiwen had tidied up quite miserably, was one among such experts. It was reported that someone had seen him slaughter a star beast that had already entered the late stage of the semi-sage realm countless years ago. Moreover, that star beast had condensed 999 Tao principles. So, his reputation had come to spread throughout the huge planet after that incident. Countless people praised him. They thought that the top position in the younger generation would definitely belong to him if he continued to practice. He had suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of Yi Shiwen 1 year ago. However, people interpreted it saying that his age wasn't enough at the time. They said that Yi Shiwen had taken an unfair advantage of his young age and had bullied the weak child. Yi Shiwen wouldn't be his match if they were of the same age. He would have killed Yi Shiwen with a flick of one finger. Yi Shiwen couldn't help but laugh at this. Other people had always taken an unfair advantage of his young age to bully him in the past. However, the situation had changed completely in this instance, since he was being blamed for taking the unfair advantage to bully someone younger. But he genuinely found it amusing. Pang Yongbo's cultivation speed was abnormally quick. Looking from the talent point of view, people could see that Yi Shiwen wasn't above him. However, age couldn't decide anything. The future journey was quite long. Why would everyone continue to practice if everything could be decided at an early age? Yi Shiwen hadn't stepped out of the closed-door training for most of the last 1 year's time. He had comprehended for some time, and then he had gone out and killed some subdragons. In fact, he had collected 10 drops of the real dragon's blood so far. He had collected enough to help increase his lifespan by 100 years. Several group of experts had arrived here because of the Azura blood rice, but they had been killed by Yi Shiwen. He hadn't seized the Azura blood rice in its entirety. He had left half of it to grow outside, and some people had arrived here to spy on it. However, many people had gradually understood that an outstanding expert was present here. Therefore, the ordinary experts didn't dare to come near this place. Yi Shiwen had comprehended, deduced, and perfected his observing person scripture in the last more than a year's time. The observing person scripture was his base. Therefore, he must improve it to a significant level. Moreover, the small universe had operated unceasingly inside his body. The situation was getting more and more chaotic. But Yi Shiwen didn't wish to get involved in this mess. The martial arts competition between the four forces was close at hand. So, he must try hard for this competition. He would come again on this huge planet sooner or later to obtain more treasures. Moreover, that dragon's vein, which had been locked up inside the ground, was a priceless treasure. However, Yi Shiwen could also smell some conspiracy brewing, and he could tell that this chaos would arrive again on this planet after a few years. So, it was quite possible that the truth would come to light as well. Therefore, he would get plenty of opportunities to participate in that major drama at that time. This over a year's time had turned out to be quite productive for Yi Shiwen. 1 year was nothing for the experts who had very long lifespans. However, it could be considered as a groundbreaking period for laying foundation for Yi Shiwen's journey on the road of martial arts. Yi Shiwen had finally condensed 999 Tao principles inside his body during this time. It was far more than an average person could. His fighting strength had also advanced, and had reached the peak of the late stage of the semi-sage realm. In fact, it was merely one step away from entering the sage realm. Yi Shiwen's foundation had stabilized over the course of this time. It had made a huge progress and had reached a high level because the place where he had been practicing was like a treasure since a dragon's vein was locked up underground. It looked mediocre from outside. However, the spirit energy it leaked had filled the cave mansion, and Yi Shiwen was trying to make a breakthrough to 1,000 Tao principles inside this treasure trove. An average person could only condense 999 Tao principles at the most. This was the limit, and many people couldn't even achieve this amount. Only those experts who had managed to level up to the Great Complete Realm with half-step legendary realm could condense 999 Tao principles. As for 1,000 Tao principles, it was impossible to condense 1,000 Tao principles. This scenario only existed in fairy tales. However, Yi Shiwen didn't feel that his body had reached its limit. So, Yimo suggested him to attempt a breakthrough to 1,000 Tao principles, and his cultivation would obtain enormous benefits in the future if he could really do so. He had just set foot on the threshold when it came to the aspect of his future cultivation, and he would be able to advance smoothly in the future if he were to have a more reliable and solid foundation. Yi Shiwen went into a deep level of comprehension. He could enter such a state anytime and anywhere with the help of his mysterious space, as long as he had enough spirit energy. So, it wasn't a difficult thing for him. Rings of light began to revolve around Yi Shiwen's body. These mysterious rays of light were dazzling enough to intoxicate anyone. Time passed day by day. A huge sensation had aroused in the outside world, while Yi Shiwen was trying hard to make a breakthrough to 1,000 Tao principles. Someone had seen an enlightened mind ancient trees on top of a mountain. So, the experts present on this huge planet seethed with excitement when they heard of this. The so-called cultivation was external as well internal. The external cultivation involved the practice of martial arts techniques, and the internal cultivation involved cultivating one's own mind. The experts often gave importance to cultivating their mental state. The mental state and martial arts techniques are different. The martial art techniques require step-by-step practice. However, the mental state might not require that. In fact, the mental state of an old roadside sweeper could be more profound than that of a legendary expert. So, it was quite difficult to say. One's realm couldn't decide one's mental state. However, it was very important. An expert couldn't control his strength if he didn't have the sufficient realm to support that. Yi Shiwen could display as well as control the strength of the late stage of the semi-sage realm, even though he was at the initial stage of semi-sage realm. In fact, his strength had already reached the peak of semi-sage realm. Yet he didn't dare to promote his strength to the sage realm, since his current realm hadn't made a breakthrough. This clearly showed the importance of realm. 9 out of 10 so-called cultivators used to practice in order to improve their realms. Otherwise, it was quite easy to merely increase the strength. An expert could give anything to reach to the peak, or could possibly swallow lots of heavenly treasures, and so on. And these methods could enhance the martial power very rapidly. However, they could easily meet with accidental rebound if they didn't have enough mental control. And their 100 years of cultivation could vanish all of a sudden. The biggest function of this enlightened mind ancient tree was that it could help a person to clearly see through their own mind. And it was very important to clearly become aware of one's own conscience for the sake of cultivation. However, that was impossible for a majority of people. In fact, it was very difficult to accomplish for those people who were too smart for their own good, or those who indulged in plotting against others. Therefore, the so-called pure and innocent like the heart of a newborn was the rarest statement. The clearer a person could see through their own mind, the better the cultivation of their mental state would become. And there were plenty of methods to quickly increase the strength if the cultivation of the mental state could be increased rapidly. It's just like an engine of the battleship. The weight of the battleship is of no consequence as long as sufficient power is supplied. Therefore, one could well imagine how appealing this enlightened mind ancient tree was for these experts. In fact, even the ancient folklores had never spoken of many people who had possessed an entire enlightened mind ancient tree. However, the enlightened mind ancient tree that had appeared this time didn't blot out the sky. and cover the earth as mentioned in the folklores. It wasn't extremely tall. In fact, it was merely the size of a man. So, it was totally different from its version in the folklores. However, someone guessed that this was only a branch of the enlightened mind ancient tree that had grown up and taken shape of late. So, its efficacy might not be as good as that of the entire enlightened mind ancient tree. However, it was sufficient to make countless experts crazy. However, God knows how many terrifying experts would have arrived here if the complete tree had appeared. However, even if this small branch was sufficient to make countless people crazy, the sage and great sage experts, who had gone into the depths of this huge planet looking for that wind dragon's left behind treasures, returned to compete over this small plant. These rumors fell into Yi Shiwen's ears as well. However, he didn't pay attention to them. The most important thing for him was to condense 1,000 Tao principles, and he would only be satisfied if that were to happen. Bang! Yi Shiwen's cave suddenly shook fiercely. A heavy object had crashed on the vacant land in front of that cave. Yi Shiwen swept out his divine sense and discovered that the object that had come to crash was a small tree. It was the size of a person. It was reddish-brown in its entirety, just like an unknown metal. It was emitting a strange light, and this light flickered and dazzled. Each leaf on that tree appeared like white jade, and its entire body was translucent. A quick glance at it could make a person sink deeply into oneself. It was like watching everything from one's own past appear before one's eyes. Yi Shiwen suddenly thought, could it be that rumored enlightened mind ancient tree? To be continued. Chapter 424. Yi Shiwen awakened Yimo. Yimo had been busy cultivating the Azura blood rice inside the heavenly source mirror. Yi Shiwen had merely taken a part of the seeds of the Azura blood rice, but he hadn't obtained the spiritual arteries yet. Therefore, he couldn't cultivate it on a large scale, and he could only cultivate the seeds to a small extent. He had already harvested the rest of the Azura blood rice and had stored the crop. The Azura blood rice wouldn't be of great use to Yi Shiwen if cultivated on a small scale, and he could only get enormous benefits if it was to be cultivated on a large scale. However, he was accustomed to multitasking. He had constantly been doing multiple things at a time since the beginning when he had first obtained the mysterious space. So, he had grown so used to it that it came naturally to him. Yi Shiwen, this is a big opportunity, You've guessed it right. This is a sprout of the enlightening mind ancient tree. However, it's still in infancy. Yimo exclaimed loudly in excitement. This is a treasure that even the Devil King didn't possess. In fact, not many people possess the enlightening mind ancient tree, even if we were to believe the folklores. However, every person who has come to possess the enlightening mind ancient tree has become a world-shaking expert. Your cultivation would advance by leaps and bounds if you had this sprout of the enlightening mind ancient tree in your hand. This divine item was exceptionally precious. One could well imagine how precious it was from the fact that even the Devil King hadn't possessed one. Yi Shiwen's cultivation would advance smoothly if he could have the assistance of this enlightening mind ancient tree. He wouldn't need to worry about the growth of his mind as long as he was able to cultivate under this tree. And there obviously wouldn't be any hindrance. It would have obviously been very difficult to deal with it if it were a fully grown, enlightening mind ancient tree. In fact, even a great sage realm expert could be thrashed to death by a single branch of a full mature tree. Yi Shiwen had seen this enlightening mind ancient tree fall from the sky. It had sustained cuts of all sizes on its entire body, and multicolored divine fluid was flowing out of its wounds. It seemed as if it had gone through a threshing war. But its roots had suddenly penetrated into the ground and had begun to absorb the spirit energy from the grounded dragon's vein. And the cuts on its body gradually began to repair with the unceasing absorption of the spirit energy. This sprout of the enlightening mind ancient tree isn't stupid. It knows that a dragon's vein is present underground. That's why it has escaped and arrived here. It can be assumed from its appearance that it's being chased. Yemo said. The so-called spiritual trees possessed a soul inside their body. Moreover, this enlightening mind ancient tree was an ancient variety of the spiritual trees. So, it was bound to have one, but it was still in infancy. So, its spiritual wisdom might be immature as well. However, it nevertheless possessed spiritual wisdom and knew where it should go and where it shouldn't. Moreover, it was impossible for this kind of spiritual tree to stay rooted at one place till death. So, it wasn't easy to catch it since it could always run away when under the threat of getting caught. The news about the appearance of the enlightening mind ancient tree had spread throughout this huge planet. So, several people were covetously eyeing this enlightening mind ancient tree, and it was hard to tell how many times it had been intercepted by them until now. In fact, this enlightening mind ancient tree could expect to run into countless experts in the future, since many people would arrive to cut off a portion of it, let alone other people. Even Yi Shiwen was drooling over it. It's not good. Yi Shiwen, this tree may draw other experts here. That would be too bad. Yi Mo suddenly responded. Yi Shiwen could have avoided the big problem by walking away in normal times. And he could have even taken away this sprout of the enlightening mind ancient tree. However, he was undergoing closed-door training right now. So, he had put the entirety of his strength into making a breakthrough. Therefore, he couldn't go anywhere else. And it would be too bad for him if he was discovered. After all, those people out there weren't the friendly type. Yemo's voice hadn't even faded away when a figure arrived treading on the rainbow light. And he burst into laughter when he spotted the enlightening mind ancient tree. Ha ha, you and Hongzhou am really lucky. I will undergo the closed-door practice for several hundred years after I've obtained this enlightening mind ancient tree. And I will become invincible after that. Yi Shiwen swept out his divine sense. It was an over 20 years old heroic young man. He was clad in purple-colored, magnificent clothes. His stature was tall and straight. Yi Shiwen became aware of this young man's origin as soon as he heard him call his own name. Many top Heaven's Pride level experts of the younger generation had revealed their talents in this last more than a year's time, and their fame had spread throughout the planet as a result. This Yuan Hongzhou was one such expert, apart from Pang Yongbo, of course. It was said that Yuan Hongzhou was from the northern region. In fact, he was from the northern desolate land's biggest force, Longevity Heaven. He was a Heaven's Pride level expert of the young generation, and been specially nurtured by the Longevity Heaven. So, it was hard to find his rival in the younger generation of the northern desolate land. He was one of the most active ones among all the top experts of the younger generation who had arrived at this huge planet. His strength had reached the peak of the late stage of semi-sage realm, and he had already condensed 999 principles. So, he was only one step away from entering the sage realm. This was sufficient to be revered as a top expert in the younger generation. Yuan Hongzhou held a pitchfork in his hand, and he rushed towards the enlightening mind ancient tree without any hesitation in order to catch it. However, the enlightening mind ancient tree began to flee. It pulled out its roots from the soil, and its roots started to appear like countless legs. It then began to run at an amazing speed. Where do you think you are going? Yuan Hongzhou brandished his pitchfork. It flew forward like a roaring black dragon, and ferociously nailed the two stems of the enlightening mind ancient tree to the ground in an instant. The entire body of the enlightening mind ancient tree started to quiver, and multicolored divine fluid gushed out of its body. It was evidently in extreme pain. This is just like disaster approaches from the sky while the person sits at home. Yi Shiwen secretly frowned. The appearance of this enlightening mind ancient tree in this vicinity wasn't a big fortune for him. It was an absolute disaster for him, on the contrary. The enlightening mind ancient tree would attract numerous experts here. In fact, it might even attract sage experts from the depths of the planet after some time. And that would be too bad for him. There were many Sage Realm and Great Sage Realm experts present on this huge planet. These experts had rushed towards the wind dragon's lair after it had been suspected to be found. However, this didn't mean that they wouldn't return. Enlightening Mind Ancient Tree was too big an attraction to resist. It was merely a small sampling, and it would probably take 10,000 years or even 100,000 years to mature. But it was still a priceless treasure. Yi Shiwen wouldn't have been wary of this Yuan Hongzhou on ordinary days. In fact, he wouldn't have cared even if many experts had arrived. However, he was undergoing closed-door training. Moreover, he was at the juncture of making a breakthrough. So, he couldn't bear any disturbance at the moment since he could experience a rebound and accidentally turn into a devil. However, he was capable of multitasking. An average person wouldn't even have the time to think about something else if they were in his place. Yi Shiwen became somewhat anxious in his heart. However, his mental state was in order, and there were no ripples in his mind. He didn't allow his mind to fall into turmoil. He knew that it was necessary not to become anxious in this time of urgency. Otherwise, it would be counterproductive. Haha, I'm genuinely the child of destiny. I will become the top expert of the longevity heaven with the assistance of this enlightening mind ancient tree. Yuan Hongzhou laughed out loud. He stretched out his big hand. It transformed into a big hand made up of energy and covered the entire sky as it advanced towards the enlightening mind ancient tree to grab it. Don't even think about that. A loud shout came from behind Yuan Hongzhou. A terrifying lightning ripped open the space as it swept down from the sky towards Yuan Hongzhou to chop him down. Yuan Hongzhou's reaction wasn't slow either. He immediately stretched out his palm, and he pinched and scattered the lightning attack. However, he was surprised to see a small figure not far away from him. This figure was coming towards him, treading on the rainbow light. Yi Shiwen swept out his divine sense and realized that it was that Pang Yongbo whom he had tidied up quite miserably almost a year ago. In fact, this kid had become even sharper from what he used to be a year ago, like an unsheathed sword. Yuan Hongzhou, this enlightening mind ancient tree belongs to me. No one else is worthy of this tree. Pang Yongbo had the vigor of a dragon and the ferocity of a tiger. He took mighty strides and arrived in front of Yuan Hongzhou. He didn't have any scruples in facing the powerful Yuan Hongzhou. The enlightening mind ancient tree was about to fall into Yuan Hongzhou's hand. However, Pang Yongbo had suddenly interfered. Yuan Hongzhou's complexion had turned exceptionally ugly because of this. He coldly said, "You are just a baby who still sucks his mother's milk. How can you deserve such a precious treasure?" Yuan Hongzhou had spoken rather bluntly, and Pang Yongbo's little face sunk as he heard this remark. He didn't like when someone said anything about his age. An immense hatred emerged inside his heart for Yuan Hongzhou. Pang Yongbo and Yuan Hongzhou had fought several times in the past, and both the individuals were on the same level. Therefore, he had already disliked him. His killing intention had become even more obvious, and it went all out towards Yuan Hongzhou. Yuan Hongzhou was also infuriated with Pang Yongbo since the kid had ruined his chance. In fact, he had even hoped for Yi Shiwen to eliminate Pang Yongbo in the past. Neither of you deserves this valuable treasure. Only this young master does. A clear and bright voice sounded. A figure arrived treading on the rainbow light. He held a folding fan in his hand. He appeared like a handsome and elegant young master. Yi Shiwen became surprised when he saw this man. This man was none other than young Master Feng. If one would compare this man with his past self, whom Yi Shiwen had brutally beaten a year and a half ago, one would see that his injuries from that time had already restored. Even his cultivation had made a huge progress. He had condensed 999 Tao principles. He was at the peak of the late stage of semi-sage realm. However, such kind of progress in more than a year's time wasn't surprising. These experts had arrived thick and fast, and all of them were covetously eyeing that sprout of the enlightening mind ancient tree. In fact, they were literally drooling over it. So, they all wanted to get hold of it. Moreover, Yi Shiwen perceived the ruthlessness of their nature and was convinced that they would destroy it if they themselves got defeated, but they wouldn't leave it for the others. I heard that this huge planet is a lair of the wind dragon, but I didn't expect that I will get to see the enlightening mind ancient tree here. This is a rare treasure. I, Chief Fiefin, am really lucky. A golden light came flying from far away along with a burst of clear and hearty laughter. The golden overflowed everywhere and illuminated the surroundings. A human holding a spear arrived from far away. He trod on the rainbow light like a golden god of war. Yi Shiwen's eyes opened wide. The man who had arrived just now was a close acquaintance of his. However, he hadn't seen Chief Fiefin in a long time. He saw the manner in which Chief Fiefin held a spear in his hand. He looked invincible, just like the golden god of war. His aura had become vigorous and profound. The profound Tao principles were wrapped around his entire body. He had already reached the peak of the late stage of semi-sage realm. His body had 999 Tao principles. These Tao principles were incomparably thick. He had certainly become several times more tyrannical than he used to be in the past. To be continued. Chapter 425. Chapter 425. Desperate Situation. Yi Shiwen hadn't anticipated that he would see Chief Fiefin since the man had joined the True Martial University quite early. In fact, he had inquired about Chief Fiefin after he arrived at the True Martial University, but he hadn't been able to find his whereabouts. After all, millions of people had joined the True Martial University at that time, so it wasn't easy to find one individual person. Then, he had come across several other matters afterwards. So, he had never gotten the time to find his fellow apprentices from the Yuan school thereafter. However, Yi Shiwen hadn't thought that he would see him again here. Moreover, his cultivation had already reached to the peak of the semi-sage realm, and his foundation was even stronger than Pang Yangbo's. Had he come across some fortuitous encounter of late? However, Yimo wasn't very surprised. Chief Fiefin used to be an extremely powerful expert of half-step legendary realm back when Yi Shiwen had last known him, and he had managed to practice to such extent in a small place like the Yuan school. So, it was needless to say that it had been possible because of his innate talent only. Yi Shiwen had advanced by leaps and bounds in these several years. But Chief Fiefin hadn't sat idle either. However, Yi Shiwen had no other choice but to wait for this matter to end. He could only talk to Chief Fiefin afterwards. However, these four individuals weren't the only ones who had arrived here. The enlightening mind ancient tree was far too alluring, and the experts could distinguish themselves among their peers if they managed to obtain this branch of the enlightening mind ancient tree. So, who wouldn't wish to obtain it? Hundreds of experts had arrived one after another after Chief Fiefin's arrival, and all of them were at the late stage of the semi-sage realm. Moreover, each of these experts possessed 700 to 800 Tao principles. They were extremely tyrannical young elites, and nearly all of them were only one step away from entering the sage realm. Only the number of Tao principles differed from one another. However, the number of Tao principles at the time of breakthrough would decide their level of strength once they would enter the sage realm. Yi Shiwen became somewhat anxious. The entire cave might collapse if a fight were to break out among these experts, and he certainly wouldn't have any place to hide if that were to happen. Everyone looked at each other. They quickly realized that only a fight could decide a winner among so many people. This enlightening mind ancient tree is mine. Yuan Hongzhou suddenly rushed forward. He trod with large strides. He transformed into a streamer of light and flew towards that sprout of the enlightening mind ancient tree to grab it. In your dreams, it's mine. Don't even think about that. Yuan Hongzhou's sudden movement left the other young powerhouses to clamor. So, they desperately launched attacks towards him, and all sorts of attacks swept across. However, Yuan Hongzhou was already prepared for it. He dodged these attacks and continued to move towards the enlightening mind ancient tree. Everyone was agitated, and they were unwilling to give up when they saw Yuan Hongzhou gain an upper hand. They obviously couldn't allow him obtain the advantage. Wind Spirit Hand Seal. Young Master Feng effortlessly used a seal secret. Suddenly, An endless amount of spirit energy was absorbed from the surroundings and got condensed into a dreadful seal. It then pounded towards Yuan Hongzhou. Rumble. The entire ground cracked and collapsed. But Yuan Hongzhou managed to dodge. He avoided the attack, but huge hole formed in the ground. It belongs to me. No one else can have it. Pang Yongbo became incomparably aggressive. He raised his eyebrow and forged ahead as he shouted. Then, a big hand made up of wind and thunder swept towards the enlightening mind ancient tree to grab it. Nobody could give up under this situation. Nobody wanted to give up either. Clang! A sound of the collision of metals resounded in the sky. A golden sword transformed into a huge mountain and smashed down. Rumble! The entire ground was split open by this attack of Qi Fifan. Saying anything would be pointless under this circumstance. So, they could only depend on their individual strength. One could only force the other people into submission and grab this item if they possessed enough strength. However, several more people still dared to rush into this chaotic war of hundreds of experts. They ignored the others and merely aimed to get to the forefront. Their bodies got bombarded as a result and turned into fine powder by the countless attacks from the other people. Qi Fifan and the other three individuals were obviously more powerful than the others, so they dared to rush forward as well. Get lost! This enlightening mind ancient tree belongs to my longevity heaven. Yuan Hongzhou roared repeatedly. His complexion had become exceptionally ugly. He was the first one to arrive here. So, he could have left after he had obtained the enlightening mind ancient tree. However, he hadn't anticipated that such a fight would break out when he had first arrived here. And this had become the main reason for his presently angered state of mind. Crack! A loud sound of the shattering of space sounded. Yuan Hongzhou's pitchfork moved on its own and flew back to his hand. And his fighting strength increased even more as he held his weapon again. More than 100 people were fighting in groups. So one would come across the joint attacks of other people if they tried to approach the enlightening mind ancient tree. However, the enlightening mind ancient tree suddenly began to run since it was no longer pinned down by the pitchfork. And Yi Shiwen became numb with fear because he realized that the enlightening mind ancient tree had started to run towards the cave's direction. He would be exposed if it continued to run in this direction. Humph! You think you can escape? A loud snort sounded, and a big hand of wind and thunder pressed down upon the enlightening mind ancient tree. The enlightening mind ancient tree was running at a very fast speed. It even managed to dodge this sudden and violent attack of the big wind thunder hand. However, this attack was immediately followed by the joint attacks of hundreds of experts. They had arrived here to obtain this enlightening mind ancient tree. So, they naturally couldn't allow it to escape. Otherwise, wouldn't it defeat their purpose to come here? Rumble! Yi Shiwen's hill-sized cave collapsed under this first sudden and violent attack. In fact, it was blown to pieces. The smoke and dust dispersed, and a figure sitting in a cross-legged position appeared in front of everyone. You are! Two individuals shouted in unison. These were Pang Yongbo and young Master Feng. These two individuals possessed immense hatred for Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen had taught a lesson to Pang Yongbo in the past, and Pang Yongbo had lost his face as a result, whereas young Master Feng had been chased and beaten like a dog by Yi Shiwen. In fact, he would be long dead had he not used the transmission scroll back then. Therefore, they looked at Yi Shiwen as if they had come across a mortal enemy. They were exceptionally envious of him. So, they simultaneously glared at him. Young Yi? Qi Fifan was also very surprised as he saw that figure sitting in a cross-legged position. He could tell that this person was Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen had been surprised to see the speed of Qi Fifan's progress a moment ago. The same had happened with Qi Fifan at this moment. After all, Yi Shiwen's progress was far too quick. In fact, his own progress speed couldn't be compared with Yi Shiwen's. That was because Qi Fifan had already become an extremely powerful expert of the half-step legendary realm several years ago. And Yi Shiwen hadn't even reached legendary realm at that time. So, there was a difference of heaven and earth between him and Yi Shiwen. However, Yi Xuan had caught up to him in the past few years. This speed was way faster than his own. In fact, his speed was nothing in comparison to Yi Xuan's. However, he was surprised to see that the sprout of enlightening mind ancient tree had already arrived behind Yi Xuan. In fact, it had rooted itself behind him, and it had stretched out its entire leaves and branches and had shrouded Yi Xuan. In other words, it had chosen Yi Xuan as its master. Yi Xuan suddenly felt a brightness of enlightenment inside his heart. Myriads of bustling emotions and conflicts came floating like cloud in front of his eyes. These were visual representations of his conscience, and they had suddenly cleared up to appear before him. He immediately sensed a huge desire to step forward. He had constantly been thinking of a method to condense the 1000th Tao principles. However, he had suddenly obtained the solution. This enlightening mind ancient tree was truly magical. It had indeed lived up to its reputation. However, this enlightening mind ancient tree had mysteriously recognized its master. So, this had obviously made Yi Xuan everyone's target. He was at the center of the struggle. Only young Master Feng and Pang Yang Bo possessed immense hatred for him a moment ago. However, each one of those hundreds of experts had started to harbor sentiments of hatred towards him in a breath's time. And each of these individuals was a peak expert of the semi-sage realm. Moreover, each of them had condensed 700 to 800 Tao principles. Yi Xuan wouldn't be worried if there were 1 or 2 experts. However, there were so many people present here. Yi Xuan wouldn't have been afraid to snatch it if it was an ordinary day. How could they have stopped him? However, he couldn't rush off at this time because he was trapped. He was in the middle of something important, and the trouble had literally knocked on his door. Countless experts' imposing auras swept towards Yi Xuan from afar, and swept away everything like a vast sea. Each expert present on this site was an elite in their own merit. And now, Yi Xuan was forced to face the pressure of so many experts at once. Gentlemen, this so-called spiritual treasure has its own soul. So, we have no choice but to leave since the enlightening mind ancient tree has recognized its master. Qi Fifan came to a halt at this time. He then spoke as he laughed. However, he was firmly holding the long sword in his hand. In fact, he would have attacked and plundered the enlightening mind ancient tree if it had fallen into someone else's hand. However, he couldn't do so since it had fallen into Yi Xuan's hand. Yi Xuan was surrounded, but he still paid attention to Qi Fifan's action. He knew that Qi Fifan had taken the practical approach to protect him. Only a small action, just a little bit, but that could make enough room for him to get out of this mess. Then, he wouldn't need to be scared of these people. What you just spoke is very pleasant to hear, but do you think it will be enough to send us away? I am determined to obtain this enlightening mind ancient tree today, and I will kill anyone who dares to get in my way. Yuan Hongzhou coldly said. He was the first one to find this enlightening mind ancient tree. So, he had already decided that it belonged to him. How could he allow it to fall into someone else's hand? Today is the day you die. You actually dare to steal my stuff again? A sinister look appeared on young Master Feng's face as he looked at Yi Xuan. This was the second time that Yi Xuan had snatched the victory from his hands. In fact, he had been chased and beaten like a dog by Yi Xuan the last time. And this enmity was irreconcilable. So, he couldn't possibly give up on his revenge. Pang Yangbo also hated Yi Xuan. So, he too wanted to kill Yi Xuan this time. Yi Xuan had used invincible power to defeat him. But Yi Xuan hadn't killed him. However, Yi Xuan had left him in a broken state. So, Yi Xuan had left an intractable problem behind for him. Therefore, this matter would continue to gnaw at Pang Yangbo's mind, and wouldn't be resolved as long as Yi Xuan was alive. And he wouldn't feel happy till Yi Xuan had died. Pang Yangbo could use this opportunity to eradicate Yi Xuan, and his cultivation wouldn't come across any obstruction in the future. Moreover, he would be also short of one major enemy in the future. He might be young and immature, but he was an extremely vicious and merciless person. The other people had faced many difficulties in search of this enlightening mind ancient tree. So, they didn't wish to give up halfway either. However, they could only look at this enlightening mind ancient tree helplessly since they were being told they couldn't have it even though they wanted it. The folklores recounted that someone had cultivated under an enlightening Ming ancient tree and had surmounted the great sage realm after practicing for less than 10 days. The said person had then become a dreadful expert, an individual who used to be feared then and now. Moreover, this was just a small plant of the enlightening mind ancient tree and had sprouted only recently. So, it would take 100,000 years or even several 100,000 years for it to mature. However, it was still a priceless ancient treasure. Therefore, it was impossible to let it go at this point. Boy, you can only blame your misfortune that this enlightening mind ancient tree has recognized you as its master. Yuan Hongzhou took the lead to rise in revolt. He then brandished his pitchfork. To be continued. Chapter 426. Yuan Hongzhou took the initiative and rose in revolt. His pitchfork emitted unrestrained murderous aura, just like a fierce black dragon. It instantly shuttled a distance of over 100 meters and rushed towards Yishiwen. It didn't appear like a pitchfork. Rather, it seemed like a dreadful object made up of ominous energy that was overwhelmingly sweeping over towards Yishiwen with endless imposing aura. Stop! Qi Fifan moved into action at this time. His long sword swept out boundless aura. The sword energy rushed over and swept down in a slash. Bang! The sword energy ferociously crashed upon that pitchfork. That pitchfork trembled violently and got nailed down to the ground. The explosion opened a huge crack in the ground. The sword energy swept across after the crack opened. Yuan Hongzhou's complexion turned somewhat ugly. He coldly looked at Qi Fifan since the man had turned out to be a very difficult opponent. A huge and chaotic war had erupted, but Qi Fifan had a relatively higher degree of self-control among these four people. So, he hadn't gone all out from the get-set-go mark. However, this move was enough to prove that Qi Fifan wasn't an ordinary person. Yuan Hongzhou had underestimated a world hero. Qi Fifan could very well be regarded as the top powerhouse in the younger generation. However, he didn't wish to give up because of one man alone. So, he shouted, "This man is stopping us. Will you guys keep staring blankly at this? Let's get together and do it." Pang Yongbo and young Master Feng rushed towards Qi Fifan to kill him as soon as they heard this. They had realized that they must eradicate Qi Fifan first in order to kill Yi Shiwen, since he was blocking their way. Otherwise, they couldn't even think of getting near Yi Shiwen. A spiritual seal fell down towards Qi Fifan. It had the power to overturn the sky and trample the ocean. Clang, a long sword attack was unleashed, and the released sword energy filled the entire sky. Rumble, the spiritual seal was cut into two halves. However, Pang Yongbo had brandished a thunderblade at the same time. He rushed towards Qi Fifan like a thunder god. Qi Fifan's complexion was calm. He hadn't fallen into a disadvantageous position even while facing the joint attacks of three experts. His sword skill was at its best and was giving him an all-round protection. Even a drop of water couldn't approach him, let alone these people. Yi Shiwen was emotionally moved by this. Qi Fifan didn't have to take such a risk for him, but he still did, and that too on his own accord. This man genuinely deserved deep respect. However, Yi Shiwen also knew that he must focus on the task at hand right now. The problem would be solved if he could make the breakthrough in time. Then, he wouldn't have to be wary of these people. Right now, Yi Shiwen luck was both good and bad. The enlightening mind ancient tree had chosen him its master. However, he had also come across a big crisis because of it. So, even making an escape wouldn't be enough after this isolated matter had been resolved. A group of sage experts, and even great sage experts, would come looking for him once they found out that the enlightening mind ancient tree had fallen into his hands. Guys, he's being constrained at this moment. So, let's take the advantage of this opportunity to plunder the enlightening mind ancient tree. One of those over 100 experts of the late stage of the semi-sage realm shouted. And it seemed as if the others had been woken up by this idea of taking advantage of the fight between these four ferocious experts. So, they rushed towards the enlightening mind ancient tree to grab it, since it wouldn't be a good thing for them if it fell into the hands of those four individuals. That expert was the first one to react. He also ran faster than the others, and he arrived in front of Yi Shiwen in a flash. His long blade slashed down, and it seemed as if it would cut the entire world open. The space was split open wherever the blade went, and endless astral winds swept out. It possessed endless might. These people were also the peak experts of the semi-sage realm, even though they weren't a match of those other four individuals. So, they still couldn't be underestimated. Hee, this belongs to me. That expert laughed out loud since he realized that Yi Shiwen was unable to move. He could grab the enlightening mind ancient tree right away, and then he would escape far away. Who could chase him then? Even the Heaven's Pride level experts would then become mediocre before him. At least in his personal opinion. Bang! An endless blood ocean suddenly swept towards that expert to shroud him. His blade energy was blocked off and repelled outward. A bloody figure had appeared at Yi Shiwen's side to protect him. Young Master Feng's eyes opened wide as he saw this bloody figure. This bloody figure and Yi Shiwen had collaborated to thrash him pretty bad at the last time they had met. So, he had been left with no choice but to run away in panic at that juncture. In fact, the last three of his subordinated had to be executed after that incident. However, he was engaged in a fight with a top expert. How he could relax even a bit. Chief Ifan got an opportunity because of this momentary distraction on young Master Feng's part and broke his Wind Spirit Hand seal. Then, he found an opening and suddenly arrived in front of young Master Feng and kicked him. Bang! Young Master Feng was sent flying by Chief Ifan's kick. Several bones in his body had been broken by the kick. The pressure was greatly reduced from Chief Ifan after young Master Feng was temporarily kicked out of the fray. These individuals had been fighting a fierce battle until now, but the bravest among them had suddenly obtained the winning position. Moreover, the Blood Slave had suddenly appeared on the other side and had stopped that expert. The Blood Slave had reached the peak of the semi-sage realm in this over a year's time. Moreover, it had condensed 999 Tao principles. So, it wasn't one bit inferior to Yi Shiwen from the time the latter had sat for breakthrough. This was the real reason why Yi Shiwen had dared to undergo such a deep closed-door training in such a dangerous place. There wasn't much difference between him and that Blood Slave. Moreover, the Blood Slave seemed in a hurry. Its master's consciousness had submerged completely in the process of condensing the 1000th Tao principle. Therefore, Blood Slave's hands transformed into a pair of dragon claws, and it crushed that approaching blade energy. That expert was flying in the air, and his imposing aura was surging and boiling. He certainly wasn't an ordinary person. That expert unleashed the world-shaking blade energy once again, and dozens of feet-long blade energy swept down towards Yi Shiwen. The Blood Slave couldn't avoid this attack, since Yi Shiwen was sitting like a statue behind him. So it moved forward, treading on endless waves of blood, and welcomed the incoming attack. Everyone guessed that the battle between that expert and the Blood Slave had arrived at its conclusion. Suddenly, a blood light swept out in a flash. A blood sword emerged out from the endless blood waves and cut that expert in half without any delay. Then the Blood Slave came to a halt. It was still riding above the blood waves. It seemed as if it was standing above all and was looking disdainfully at the entire world from the corner of its eyes. It coldly stared at those people and rushed towards them. Its gaze appeared as electrifying as two streaks of red lightning. Its facial features weren't clearly visible. However, its energy covered the entire surroundings. Chief Ifan had become anxious when he had seen that Yi Shiwen might get killed. However, he relaxed after he saw that Yi Shiwen had a backup plan for his protection. Chief Ifan realized that Yi Shiwen had taken genuine precautions, wasn't akin to a lost fellow. Chief Ethan couldn't clearly see the Blood Man, but this Blood Man's energy core was enough to indicate that it wasn't inferior to him. In fact, it was also a peak expert. More than 100 people had rushed towards Yi Shiwen, but they had been scared away by the Blood Slave's severe attack. However, they were more than 100 individuals in number, and each of them was an elite from a particular region. So, how could they be scared away so easily? The murderous auras of more than 100 people swept across the sky. Yi Shiwen's motionless body also began to emit a heaven-shaking aura. It gradually expanded and became stronger, little by little. Everyone's complexions changed as they saw this. They could feel that Yi Shiwen was trying to make a breakthrough. They didn't know what kind of breakthrough it was, and to which level it would take the practitioner. However, everyone knew that they mustn't allow him to make the breakthrough, especially those people who held grudge against him. Everyone knew that they would come across a huge disaster if he came out powered up after he had made the breakthrough. Kill! Those experts bellowed and rushed towards Yi Shiwen. They launched their strongest attacks on the Blood Slave. The Blood Slave also counterattacked. The dreadful blood waves condensed into a huge seal, inverting ocean seal. It appeared like an unrestrained sea that would crush anything in its way. It swept down and ferociously collided with the attacks of those experts. This was the second type of the overturning the heaven seal, the inverting ocean seal. Yi Shiwen had strived to improve his martial arts techniques in the past more than a year's time. The Hanzhan seal had progressed to become overturning the heaven seal. So, the power of inverting ocean seal had also increased several times. It might be an extremely strange and extraordinary technique for other people. However, it was just a terrifying and truly disastrous technique for Yi Shiwen. It exploded in the sky. Then, the terrifying power pressed down and shattered a vast chunk of space. The terrifying energy waves spread across the world. The Blood Slave unleashed a terrifying power, which then transformed into a blood pond. Those several experts of the late stage of the semi-sage realm launched attacks with the entirety of their strength. It carried a terrifying power. The Blood Slave couldn't block such a large-scale attack and got exploded into fragments in the end. However, those experts also had half of their bodies exploded into fragments by the Blood Slave's inverting ocean seal. They screamed endlessly. However, these experts hadn't even begun to feel happy when they suddenly saw that the Blood Slave had regenerated little by little. Everyone stared blankly in shock. Such an attack had made them harbor a sense of despair. This battle continued without any result. The Blood Slave wasn't a match for all of them together. However, they couldn't kill the Blood Slave either. How would they be able to go past him if they continued to fight like this? Everyone, let's keep attacking him together. I don't think that this thing can continue to regenerate at this rate. An expert shouted at this time. Even other experts thought that this man was right. How could this Blood Slave continue to regenerate again and again? It certainly had its limit, and they would have to break that limit to break through and go past. Everyone was engaged in a bloody battle. Chief Ethan and those 3 experts were fighting in one group, and those 100 or so experts were fighting with the Blood Slave in another group. The battlefield situation had become exceptionally intense in the war between the two sides. The consequence would be extremely serious if Chief Ethan and the Blood Slave could drag this battle until Yi Shiwen was done with his breakthrough. On the contrary, the result would be completely different if these experts managed to kill Yi Shiwen before he could make the breakthrough. A violent collision occurred between the two sides. To be continued. That you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.